Welcome to Anti-Crusade, part 1 of 4. And I've been thinking a lot about the fact that Zionism is a continuation of the Crusades. And in order to get people to understand that, this cannot be just a Jewish thing. There must be a pan-Abrahamic look at the problem at hand. And there's a lot that I have to say. There's so much I need to say about that. But first, let's understand that the Israel versus Palestine problem is not a conflict between Jewish and Muslim. Not at all. And to drive that home, to really bring that to you the way that it should be, one must understand something. Now, I apologize if the video for this is distorted. My video mixer is not the best. I don't know how to slice videos. I always have to get help, and sometimes those who I want to credit wish to remain anonymous. Most people probably know who the person who sliced the videos, because there's going to be a lot of video cuts in here, but I'm not really supposed to say. The person wants to remain anonymous. Sometimes I'll give credit, sometimes I won't. But, you know, I don't know. This person didn't agree to help me with any credits at the beginning. So I want to thank the anonymous editor who helped me slice the videos. There are only 2 videos on this channel that I had ever made myself when Donna Newman was the owner of this. So you have to understand something. This channel, the Bundist Movement, is not my channel. This is equally my channel and Dr. Weisfeld's channel. He just lets me have the floor for the most part because I understand the method to this, and this is an opportunity for me to show him how I would really present it. I've had to really deprogram myself from Donna Newman's style that she had me under. But what parts of her style have remained? Now, Dr. Weisfeld, while he is not an anarcho-Bundist, he has an actual pact with the anarcho-Bundists. There's a serious disagreement between him and Corporal Cat, but there's one massive alliance that they both hold me under, and that's that don't say Jew, say Jewish. Don't say Jews, say Jewy or Jewish people. And I try my best to keep that. That was something Donna Newman came up with, and it's correct. In fact, this is actually before there was the falling out, back when they were like the biggest pen pals of all time, back in, you know, the years and years ago. When they were true pen pals, Donna Newman and Dr. Weisfeld had come to this kind of concept. I kind of just adopted it. I say personally Jew and Jews, and if you go to the Comrade Net channel, you'll notice that that's the case. I'm just more comfortable with the common vulgarization. However, for this channel, I do follow a certain code, but I have to do it within a style that's organically mine, and that's kind of how you can tell when I'm distinguishing between my opinion and different collective opinions that I facilitate for philosophical, political reasons for this channel. So, one of the things I have to do, this video largely is going to be about, throughout all of its commentary, me trying to explain the difference between the school of thought from mine and that from Dr. Weisfeld's. There's the chairman's school of philosophy for this, and then there's the cleric's school of philosophy for this. And I'm desperately going to think about these things before this video is finished. But by the time it's finished, you're going to be very impressed, I hope, with it. So I will give a disclaimer. I'm going to struggle the most when I give commentary to the Reform rabbi, the Reform Zionist rabbi. She's very difficult, and I will try very hard to keep my best, but I keep my stuff, but it just seems like I'm not going to be able to, like, keep my wits of it, because I can afford to make more mistakes for part 1 of 4. Part 2 of 4, part 3 of part 4, and part 3 of 4, part 2 of 4, part 3 of 4, and part 4 of 4, please forgive me, are going to be a bit more, for lack of a better word, of professional style. I have adopted the position of the late Hannah Toff, fuck professionalism. But she's not the only one that had that position, but I will try to make a professional-like style, for lack of a better word here. But this first one is more of the unhinged. So this video is a bit unhinged, but it's proceeding afterwards. It's afterthought videos. Like, part one of one is a bit unstable because you dive in with the anger. Once you get to the 3 of 4, once you get to 2 of 4, 3 of 4, and 4 of 4, if you can follow what I'm saying, it's going to be a bit more stable. But I have to dive into this because you need to get a hold in your mind, for everybody I take on this journey, that Zionism is the continuation of the Crusades. It is not even Jewish supremacy. And I will try to talk about to everyone what is Jewish supremacy and what is Judean supremacy and what is Zionism, because these three things are not the same thing. Neither of these three are good, by the way. But Judean supremacy and Jewish supremacy are aberrations within Judaism. Zionism is not even an aberration within Judaism. Zionism is a continuation of the Crusades. And the irony is when the Catholics started to regret the Crusades, that's when the Protestants are like, that's the only thing the Catholic Church did right. And so a lot of times when you're dealing with a Catholic, they're not really practicing a very organic Catholicism. They're more actually Protestants in disguise. And that may sound like a bigoted charge, but it's not. To uphold, tolerance to the Protestant corruption is actually bigotry, because Protestant values are colonial. Catholic values by themselves are not exactly colonial, but the tendency for them to go colonial is there. And there's a lot to get into in that. And so if you are a Catholic, this is actually a safe place to watch, despite some criticisms. Because one thing I'll tell you, in the United States of America, which is a terrible country, the only good thing for Jewish people and Catholics is this is the country where we learned reciprocity with one another. This is the only country where that happened. And many of us are coming to, return to an anti-Americanism. While it is a must to be a Jewish anti-Zionist, many Jewish Europeans before coming to the United States of America had warned not to come to the United States of America, and there were a lot of reasons for this. So I hope that rant didn't get you lost, but it's the best way I can do an introduction. I apologize for the bad quality in this mixer, but this came out on November 11th, 2023 from Middle East Eye. Free Palestine.
I'm here with a Jewish bloc where we're marching together for free Palestine and justice for everyone. I'm here for a few different reasons, and one of them is that there is nothing in the world that can justify what's happening in Gaza. Nothing can justify the attacks on hospitals, the children dying, and everything else that's happening there. The second reason I'm here is because I want to show other Jews in London and everywhere that this isn't against us. These marches aren't fueled by anti-Semitism. These marches aren't fueled as a hatred against Jews. Last time I was here, a couple of weeks ago, a group of Palestinians came up to us, wearing kippahs and visibly Jewish. They came up to us and they told me, hey, when Palestine is free, you're invited to our house. And they told me that Jews and Muslims are brothers. And if any Jew in London is feeling uneasy and unsafe about the situation, I encourage them to come out here. You can come with your kippahs and you'll face nothing but love from the people here.
Now let's go to a report from Al Jazeera, which came out on November 26, 2023.
In recent weeks, there has been an alarmingly small number of official voices calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. One exception has been Francesca Albanese, an Italian trained in international law. She is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, and she's been vocal in one interview after another on the need for journalists to remember the context in this story and what international law says about the rights and responsibilities of the occupier and the occupied. Long before October 7th, Albanese was the target of smear campaigns and calls for her dismissal from the UN. Not one for being silenced, she has gone in the other direction, chastising the UN for its inaction. And Albanese has implored the media to do better, telling journalists they have a lot of homework to do.
The necessity of reclaiming a more humane narrative is categorically imperative both to protect...
Francesca Albanese joins us now. Ms. Albanese, you've been on a media blitz ever since October 7th. You are no stranger to the sensitivities around this story. But tell us about some of your interactions with reporters and editors since that day, the assumptions that journalists have on this story. What's it been like for you?
Hi, Richard. It's uneven because I have to say that there have been a few journalists who have really tried to do good job, good coverage, asking me sort of neutral questions to appreciate the facts. But mostly I've had a difficult experience with mainstream media in the West because I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being challenged on how I would call things or how I would report on things.
No, it's not a trope, it's really real. So it seems not to understand what I'm saying. There is an apartheid regime. No, I'm serious. There is an apartheid regime. It's domination. This is not a trope. This is international law.
I mean, it was not my intention to challenge journalists, but it seems that they really wanted to challenge my way of looking at things, which I found disturbing. Because again, excuse me, but I'm here to report on things that I've analyzed, verified, triangulated, and yeah, I found it a bit surprising.
That relates to something that you've said about today's political landscape. You say it's marked by historical amnesia, traditional media plays a critical role in that, and that many people are living in an alternative reality. What do you mean exactly by that?
Yes, Richard, because this is not just a conflict, and calling it just a conflict is a misnomer, because this is an occupation that has been ongoing for 56 years. So very limited consideration for that, but also very limited consideration for the enduring trauma that also the Palestinians have in themselves, because while there is recognition for the tragedy that the Jewish people have lived through and through across centuries that culminated in the horror of the Holocaust, there is very little recognition of what the Palestinians had endured as a people since 1947. And through the creation of the State of Israel. They were never allowed to come to a closure. And again, this is not about Hamas. This is really the Palestinian as a people, as they try to resist a violent occupation in the occupied Palestinian territory. There is no Hamas military presence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and still over 200 people have been killed by soldiers and armed settlers. Do you see any connection to it in mainstream media? I don't think that there is a fair, objective and impartial representation of the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the Palestinians are the ones who are blamed and smeared, including when they try to protest in Western Europe or to be in solidarity with the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Palestinians have heard the calls, as we have, from Israeli officials and voices in the Israeli media for what amounts to ethnic cleansing of Gaza. As a lawyer, are you surprised by the evidence that they are willingly providing of what appears to be the intent to commit what are, in fact, war crimes? There seems to be this sense of impunity over their words.
It's surprising, yes, because the Israelis have never been so explicit in admitting responsibility for specific incidents. One of the things that were absolutely shocking was the bombing of the Jabalia refugee camp, because the Israeli army knew that there were about 400 civilians, Palestinian civilians, including hostages. And nonetheless, the camp was bombed heavily and hundreds of Palestinians were killed, hundreds were injured, and a number of hostages was reportedly killed in that case. So yeah, they've been quite outspoken about their intention, including calling for the erasure of Gaza, the flattening of Gaza.
אני חושבת שיש כאן הזדמנות גדולה. אחרי שבעזרת השם ובעזרת צה"ל גם את ח'אן יונס נהפוך למגרש כדורגל.
And at the same time, what I found more surprising is the kind of denial, and this is what I call the alternative reality that people live in the West. There are almost 15,000 who have been reportedly killed. and in politicians in the West are still debating whether a permanent ceasefire should take place or not. So yeah, this I find very surprising. We have seen before what happens to people when this fury becomes popular. And this genocidal call that we have heard from politicians and military leaders in Israel is also amplified in various groups in the Israeli society.
למחוק את עזה לגמרי, לא להשאיר שם בן אדם אחד, זה פשוט חיות אדם.
So in the face of this madness, as someone who has seen genocidal horror happening in other parts of the world, I say it's clear that this is taking the Israeli society to a very dark place, and this is why I say, in the interest of the both Palestinians and the Israelis, this must be stopped.
You've faced a lot of criticism for some of the things that you've said, and you faced some of that criticism prior to October 7th. Some cases you've been defamed. Pressure groups have been on your case to resign. What kind of things are they saying about you? Are they succeeding, Ms. Albanese, in making your job more difficult?
Look, these groups, and they're all connected one way or another because they say exactly the same things that are repeated exactly in the same way, sometimes in the same sequence, over and over. And the accusations against me are that I'm an anti-Semite, that I am pro-Hamas, and I support terrorism.
Francesca Albanese is someone who pretends to be neutral. Neither her position nor her own background have anything to do with impartiality.
These are false allegations that gives enough to me to take legal action. And it has also happened to my predecessors. Is it succeeding? I don't think so. Because eventually more and more people keep on asking me to speak and to speak out. Wherever I go, speaking to governments or speaking to the media, off record, people know. People tell me or let me understand that the situation is better known than it would seem in the public debate. But there is a lot of censorship and self-censorship because people don't want to be confronted with the allegations I have to face on a daily basis, which in my case don't distract me. I keep focused on what I have to do. But I think that it's necessary to tackle this issue at the global level because it's now also the weaponization of anti-Semitism and the level of smear against anyone who utters a word of criticism against Israel. And everyone who utters a word of solidarity with the Palestinians face such a huge and evil campaign. I also spoke with, human rights defenders in the Pacific Islands, where they say, we face even arrest and detention if we come out and protest in solidarity with the Palestinian people against what's happening in the Gaza Strip. So there is a crushing of freedom of assembly, a crushing of freedom of expression and of the right to protest, that it's absolutely unprecedented at this global level and of this scale.
Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. You're up against it. We understand you're very busy. We're very grateful for the time that you've made for us today.
Thank you, Richard.
Ceasefire is not enough. The entire state of Israel simply has no right to exist. It is not utopian that it can be dismantled. The simple truth is they've turned all the Arab nation states against them. So we need to stand in solidarity with the Arab world against the state of Israel. If you stand with the state of Israel, you can only be referred to as a fascist. If you oppose Jewish people, you also can only be referred to as a fascist. The majority of Jewish people do oppose the state of Israel. Okay, now, I'm going to introduce some words here because in this recording process, I have had the difficulty of responding to that Reform Zionist rabbi, and there were some words I missed. So let's just clarify. When speaking English, instead of saying Jew, the word Jewish is used. Instead of saying the word Jews, Jewry or Jewish people is what's used. And I will tell you something that is not as well known, and that is because, thanks to the Zionist State of Israel, much of the really important, archaic Jewish literature and tradition of the Sephardim has been completely destroyed. I will give you some information on this. So, the word Yehudi, which is the Hebrew word for Jewish, doesn't come from the word Yehud, Yehud being the Hebrew word for Judah. Yehud is spelled Yod He Vav Daled He. All right. So the word Yehuda actually is a combination of the word Yehud and the forbidden tetragrammaton. The tetragrammaton is forbidden to pronounce or even spell out unless you break it up a certain way so you're not trespassing. This is also why a lot of times when you hear the word Elohim said by several of the ultra-Orthodox, you'll instead hear the word Elohim. Because the name is so sacred that it should not be uttered, in profane spaces. So the tetragrammaton, which is typically mistranslated as the word Jehovah, is spelled Yod, He, Vav, and He. Notice I put the and in there to break it up. The safe way to pronounce it before we used the term Adonai as a substitute and Hashem as a substitute, the substitute term was actually Yehud, an exclusively oral term, not a written term. Yehud is spelled Yod, He, Vav, Daled. And as for somebody who's of the tribe of Judah, the term for the tribe of Judah would not be Yehudi, that's Jewish. The term for someone of the tribe of Judah is actually Yehudahi, which is spelled Yod, He, Vav, Daled, He, Yod. And one of the things that's very important is to understand is that the Greek words, a lot of Greek words are adopted in Jewish terminology, such as the term Sanhedrin or patriarch. These are words that are Greek in origin, but that are adopted in Jewish terms, in Jewish language, which you can see throughout Jewish literature in this way, much of which survives, much of which has been destroyed by the Zionists. And yes, since 1948, there has been a campaign to destroy a great deal of the Sephardi and Mizrahi legacy, and this has been quite successful. This means that, yes, it means that the religious Ashkenazim have actually, what they've preserved becomes a national treasure for the entire Jewish people. Judea, in Hebrew, now I remind you, they don't distinguish between Judah and Judea in Arabic. Sorry, not in Arabic, in Greek so far as I know. But in Hebrew, the proper term for Judea in Hebrew is actually Yehudiya. And that is spelled Yod, He, Vav, Daled, Yod, Aleph. Now, Judean, okay, would not be spelled how you probably would assume. In Hebrew, that word is spelled Yod, He, Vav, Daled, Nun, because in Hebrew it's Yehudan. Yehudan is Judean in Hebrew. It is important I say these things because, like, as I'm going through this, I realize that I'd made some mistakes which you're about to pick up on some of those mistakes. I find this in this way, this is very frustrating. But one thing that this is really about is how Zionism is a continuation of the Crusades. The Crusades came from the Roman Catholic Church. And it was a war on the Oriental Church, the Muslims, and the Jewish people. When the Crusaders had reached Jerusalem, they didn't just kill Jewish people and Muslims, they killed Christians. The Christians, prior to the rampage of the Crusades in Byzantium, had thought that the Crusaders were going to be their friends. They, there were gifts exchanged, promises were made, only for, at some point, the Crusaders to completely break their word. And then not only did they break their word, they brought the Oriental Church and the Muslims closer together as a result of these rampages and the genocide that occurred. There was a genocide. The march into Jerusalem, the First Crusade, was a genocide. It was done in the name of the cross. As today, the occupation of Palestine is done in the name of the Star of David. And they go after observant Jewish people who speak Yiddish, are looked down upon in the state of Israel. Jewish people who wave Palestinian flags are beaten. The actual continuation of the rabbinite system that holds the Mizora is with Neturei Karta and the Jewish sects that are connected to Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta gets its origin from Meir Sharim, a Jewish neighborhood right outside of the old city of Jerusalem, which predates the state of Israel, and they identify as Jewish Palestinians because they are Jewish Palestinians. Another factor to understand is that there is not much of a DNA similarity between Sephardi DNA and Palestinian DNA, but there's a very strong similarity between Ashkenazi DNA and Palestinian DNA. The reason for this is that the Palestinians actually dissent from the ancient Israelis, not the modern counterfeit Israelis, who are actually new Hebrews. These people that we call Israelis are not Israelis, they are new Hebrews, if we really want to be precise about who these people are. And it's important to see them that way because many of them convert to the Baha'i faith, even though that's not supposed to happen according to their laws and different religions. So the Hebrew people are not all Jewish anymore. They may have come from Jewish stock, but they are not all Jewish anymore, and they should not be seen as a Jewish nation. They are a byproduct, an unfortunate byproduct of cultural genocide. And the version of Hebrew they speak is not in line with actual Hebrew. But they are new Hebrews. They are a group. But they have no territorial rights to that land whatsoever. Those rights belong exclusively to the Palestinians. Every crusade has come to an end, but what many people don't know is it was actually a British lord who had originally said concerning the state of Israel or concerning the Zionist project that a land for a people without a land. This would later be picked up by a Zionist. So it went from a Christian Zionist to a territorialist to then a Zionist, actually, and I don't remember their names. But this gets into another thing. Jewish territorialism I would define as Jewish supremacy, but not Zionism. There's also diaspora Zionism, which I should get into another time, but diaspora Zionism is not okay. There's no such thing as a good version of Zionism. And, these distinctions are important to make so that you understand what's going on. And one of the distinctions that must be made is that when the Nakba happened in 1948, it is really crucial to understand that that was the left-wing Zionists that did that. Because left-wing Zionists are just as far-right as any kind of Zionist. There's no such thing as a left-wing Zionist. There's no such thing as a center-right Zionist. All Zionists are far-right, every single one of them. Because it is fascism. It just so happens that their tone and their rhetoric and the way that they package their genocidal views can be a bit more liberal or even less leftish sounding, depending on how they present it. Nonetheless, Zionism is a far right-wing ideology, and there can be no dispute about this. This is not a matter of opinion. This is more just a matter of fact. And this is also why the state of Israel is in such a panic, because they are exposed. So what do we have up next here? We have an ultra-Orthodox rabbi who doesn't recognize Reform Judaism. Good news for you. The Bund recognizes Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, and Reconstructionist Judaism, as well as modern Orthodox Judaism. But it goes beyond that. The Bund will recognize you if you're not observant at all. But if you're Jewish, you do have Judaism. I will use Dr. Weisfeld as a prime example of this. That man is actually agnostic, and not a lot of people realize that he is agnostic, but he practices Judaism. He's more practicing the cultural avenue of it, though, I would say, rather than the religious avenue of it, because Judaism is a cultural religion. It's not a philosophical religion. A philosophical religion would be like Confucianism or Taoism. And, I can get more into these details, and I plan to, but I would need more help from editors to present it in a way that's fully digestible. This is going to be quite a long speech or presentation from Rabbi Israel David Weiss from Neturei Karta International, addressing the Peace Conference on Sunday, November 19, 2023, hosted by the Islamic Society of Central Jersey in Mammoth Junction, New Jersey. And I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. And I hope this serves to educate people.
Okay, IOCJ proudly invites our friend from the Jewish community, Dr. Rabbi Weiss. His topic will be peace in Judaism. And we welcome him, and we look forward to hearing his words to contribute to today's Interfaith Peace Conference. Thank you for coming.
I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so, inshallah, sanctify His name and bring peace to the world. Assalamu alaikum. The gathering today is to discuss and talk about peace. And so, as eloquently a lady just mentioned, sitting and talking about peace is very uncomfortable, I think, in our situation, where while we're sitting here under a roof, the majority maybe already of the people of Gaza doesn't have a roof under which to sit. Yes. And they're in excruciating pain, dead, dying. It's unbelievable, it's beyond comprehension. So, although this is an interfaith and we'll be talking peace, but sometimes you have to put things aside a little bit. First of all, it may be ironic that when both Jewish people and Muslim people, when you greet each other, you say Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. So I mean, talking about peace, in America you say hi, hello, and by us, we talk about peace. I mean, our whole life is centered around peace, but it's not just peace. We're centered with God's help around the Almighty. And one of the Almighty's attributes is shalom, peace. So really it belongs to God, as the world belongs to God. And we have to be doing the will of the Almighty. We have obviously a distinctly different religion, but we are here to serve God and do His will. The Jewish people, we have our covenant of 3,000 years ago, and this is a covenant of accepting the words of the Torah. The words of the Torah is to be subservient to the Almighty. That is basically what Judaism means. It just means to be subservient to the Almighty, and God gave us the Torah, which is the law, 613 commandments that we are required to uphold in order to follow the rules that the Almighty wants us to follow, that we are required to follow. And we are to follow this till today, exactingly, without any changing. You may find that over 300 years ago, there was a movement called Reform Judaism. They're going to reform the religion. We don't look at that as anything Jewish at all. I'm not talking actually what my opinions are. I'm talking what Judaism is. Judaism is a covenant that we made with God. Anything that diverts from that, that goes away from that, is not Judaism. It's a godly given thing. Reform Judaism came along and said they're going to change, they're going to reform. Now, anybody who's a little bit intelligent will understand you can't go and reform God's words because you want to. This is what, there was a movement over 300 years ago. From that, they wanted to assimilate, that they should drop the Jewish garb, they wanted to be able to assimilate and feel comfortable among the non-Jewish neighbors in Europe. So they started dressing as it was in the Christian society, and they dropped the 10 Commandments, keeping Sabbath, keeping kosher, which is not the 10 Commandments, kosher, but Sabbath is, and many of the other laws, and they pick and choose what's convenient. They, by the way, ironically also, is that they didn't want, when the new movement started a little later called Zionism, which means to go up and take over the land of Palestine, they didn't want that because they wanted to assimilate. Just they shouldn't be so conspicuous. Well, later, their children already, and grandchildren mostly coming from non-religious Jews, Jews who dropped their religion, as Reformed Jews did, they came along and said, hey, it's not working. They were still hated as Jews. People still say, you dirty Jew, and they would go to the bar and get drunk and start spewing anti-Semitism. Basically, they came along and they said, we don't like this idea of assimilating, it's not working. Maybe it was just an excuse, or it was just simply they had a plan. They wanted to create a sovereignty, a nationhood, a nationalist concept. This was a mere 150 years ago. Now remember, we have a covenant that's 3,000 years. We spread out amongst the nations 2,000 years with the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago. This movement of reform is 300 odd years. A little later started Zionism, which is around 150 years ago. Actually, reform could be a little less than 300 years, but basically the children and grandchildren started this movement of nationalism. We'll make our own country. As a general rule, the people who made this movement were non-religious, so it was entirely non-religious, and they hated religion. Someone that didn't even believe in God. I carry around pictures with me. Anybody can go to our site, nkusa.org. They're making here, this is by the Declaration, David Ben-Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall. And so you would see by a dais, if you would have a creation of a Muslim state, you obviously will see imams sitting at the table. At least one imam's placed there for just for show or something. Here you have them sitting there, and not one person even covering the head by this Declaration of Independence in 1948. David Ben-Gurion is there reading the Declaration of Independence, this momentous historic occasion in the creation of the State of Israel. And here's the picture of Theodor Herzl there. But of course, Stars of David are on the wall. And they call it a Jewish state, the State of Israel. Now, so this is quite important because we're speaking about peace. The issue is that when one speaks about, the reason we're getting back together to speak about peace, because obviously there's problems of living peacefully together. So it's critical that make such a meeting a conference of peace. And of course, we're very thankful to the Islamic Society of Central Jersey and to Dr. Assad, God give long and healthy years for making this. But when you sit and talking about peace, you have to know, when you go to a doctor, you're going to go to a doctor who's well known, that he's a good doctor. What does it mean, a good doctor? That he looks at a person and he could diagnose what the sickness is. And once he diagnoses the sickness, he'll prescribe a medication that should be properly, to the sickness has to do with this, and he'll be able to solve the problem. If you go to a doctor and he sees a person's hemorrhaging, and he gives him cortisone to take away the pain, and he puts on band-aids to cover the wound, I mean, he's not a good doctor, he's a criminal. We have an issue here. Yes, we have to live, with all due respect, we have to live, religions have to, we always live together. We lived in peace. Like I say, we greet each other, Shalom Aleichem, Salam, we lived in peace. I carry around a picture how we used to live, and my colleague there is 8th generation Palestinian, Rabbi Rosenberg. We live together in peace. We always live together in peace. We have an interesting history. There was the Inquisition. There was the time in Spain and Portugal, they tried to, hundreds of years ago, they wanted to forcefully convert Jews out of their religion to Christianity. They tortured them. You can go there, they still have the tools they used to torture. They burnt them. They banned them from the lands, and the Jews went away. And where did they go? They went to Muslim countries. They went to Muslim and Arab countries who took them in. They took in the Jews, and we flourished as distinctly Jewish, practicing, God-fearing Jewish people who adhered to the laws of the Torah strictly, didn't change, didn't become Muslim. They remained Jewish, and they were respected as is required by the Muslim religion. They were given the respect, and the Muslims were scholars. They know what it says in our Torah, so it wasn't that we're hiding anything, that we have a different religion. We're not hiding that we believe in the future, that God will build a temple and everything, that we aspire to return to the Holy Land as a people with a different belief in the future. But there was never an impediment to our coexistence, because we all believe that we have to serve God, and we have to serve God and emulate God. In our Torah it says, Mahu rachum avatei teirachum. Just as God is compassionate, you must be compassionate. We live and breathe by these laws, and we live together in total harmony. There's many anecdotes where every person who lived in a Jewish, together with Jews in that community, in whatever Arab or Muslim country, including in Palestine, lived and can tell you stories of how we helped each other. We lived in the same courtyards. We babysat. We didn't have any human rights groups, United Nations, to protect us, and it wasn't necessary, because peace is what we live and breathe. Peace is the name of God, and is what we are supposed to follow and emulate. There came a movement that decided they want a national home, but in order to gain support, because it's a massive undertaking to create a national home, so this group of people, who are no slouches, don't think they were inefficient. They were efficient in what they wanted. They were scientists, doctors, and very successful businessmen, and they decided they wanted a national home. So to do that, they were really thinking of making their national home in Uganda, in Patagonia, lush lands, productive lands. In those days, it was before internet and all technology. If you want to create a good country, you would go to a lush and productive land. But then they sat down, they had a meeting in 1890s in Basel, Switzerland, and they said, look, where should we make this country? And they said, well, we'll go to Palestine. But Palestine isn't such a productive and good land to create it. But they said, wait, but here we'll be able to turn around and say to the whole world, to evangelistic Christians who say the children of Israel, the land of Israel, we'll get their support. We'll get to the many, unfortunately, Jews who dropped their religion already at 2 generations, and they're just reformed. They don't even know what the Torah says. They don't know what the Torah requires, or if they do know, they don't feel obligated by the Torah anymore, by our covenant with God. We will turn to these people, and they will support us. So they started speaking emotional words about how we suffered 2,000 years in exile. God gave us the land. And they conveniently left out our whole teaching of all the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all the prophets who said to the Jewish people, and King Solomon, by the way, who built the temple, who has considered the highest prophecy. He has a book called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, where he wrote in that holy book, he wrote, I put you on the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, with the deer in the buck of the field, and ta'iru v'im ta'iru sahav, if you will awaken my love prematurely. That God warned us. There will come a time when the temple, King Solomon writes this as a prophecy, there will come a time when the temple will be destroyed, and the Jews will be dispersed amongst the nations. Whether it was through the Greek, the Roman Empire, and when they'll be dispersed, it's because we are not on that high level of holiness that was required to live as a nation in the Holy Land. And we are not, we were warned, since this 2,000 years ago, since the destruction of the temple, do not attempt to return en masse, to create your own sovereignty. You are to remain in exile because God, who is compassionate, it's His will that we should be dispersed amongst the nations. And we are required to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And the Torah teaches us that very clearly. The distinguished Imam that mentioned earlier about Moses, how he spoke to King Pharaoh. We have another interpretation of that. He spoke to King Pharaoh with respect, and the Torah teaches us that when every land that we go to, we have to speak to the leaders, we have to pray for the well-being of the country and speak to them with respect, and so forth. Because we are under the rule of every nation. If a Jew lives in Iran, if a Jew lives in Egypt, if a Jew lives in Canada, US, wherever it may be, South Africa, a Jew has to approach and pray for the well-being of that country and speak to them with respect. This is a requirement of the laws of exile. And we are not to attempt to remove ourselves from this exile, to leave exile, and to create our own sovereignty. It's forbidden. So in other words, since the destruction of the temple, Jews are required to keep all the commandments, because we have this Torah that God gave us. It didn't change. God doesn't change. The Torah doesn't change. And we adhere to that 3,000 years. We are in these 2,000 years of exile forbidden to try to return and make our sovereignty, even if the land would have been totally uninhabited. If Palestine would have been conceptually just uninhabited, or the people would have said, hey, take it, it's yours. We would not take it. We would be forbidden to take it because the Torah forbids us to make our own sovereignty. As individuals, we are, according to the Torah, with the permission of the Ottoman Empire, who were there for 100 years, who were made we may live in that land as loyal citizens. But to create a Jewish sovereignty, even on 1 inch, 1 centimeter of land, whether it's Uganda, Patagonia, or Palestine, we are not to do that. And the rabbis actually living in Palestine, and the Jewish community that was living there for hundreds of years, these were God-fearing Jews. It happens to be that around the world, the rabbis and the communities, when they got old, the leaders of the communities, the rabbis would pick themselves up sometimes and move to the Holy Land because it was holy land by us. So they would want to live off their last years, and they would bring a few students so through to live in holiness. So it turned through the last few hundred years, it became actually 2,000 years, it became the elite of Judaism from around the world collected there. Nobody went there because he wanted to become a rich man to do business. They went there, it was a collection of Jews from around the world who were the elite of Jewish society. And they were God-fearing. So their purpose of living was to serve God. They lived together, as I mentioned, with the Muslim community in total peace. Their leaders, they had rabbis. When the Zionists came, who I said earlier, who were in breach of the Torah, this movement started, this movement of nationalists started around 150 years ago. They decided they're going to make a national home. That was in breach of all the laws. God said that we are not to try to leave exile because it's a godly decreed punishment because we were not on that level of holiness. Yes, we aspire as Jews, we dream, we aspire, we pray to God every day that we should return. We believe that one day God will make a metaphysical change in the world where all humanity will stop being atheists, will believe in one God. It says that all the nations will join arms and serve God. That we don't do anything, but we're forbidden to take any action to that end. It's a metaphysical change, a miracle that will happen in the future. That's why we always live together with the Muslims, because the Muslim people know that we aspire for this, but it's not a problem because Muslims believe the end of time will be different than us, so what? What's the difference? Whatever will happen, Muslims say it will happen like they, we say it will happen like we believe. But what it is that we believe God Himself, without any human intervention, will bring about this miraculous change in the world. Till that day, we have to be pious individuals, serve God, and that's what we did. We lived in all these countries, and I said, in Palestine, we lived as a tremendously high level of pious, of God-fearing people. And in fact, so when the Zionists came from Europe with their national aspirations to create their land, the rabbis in Palestine stood up and said, God forbid, what are you doing? We're not allowed to leave exile. And certainly, if you want to make your state, but where? In a home that's inhabited by people, you're going to breathe. What about the laws of not to kill and not to steal? What about all the Jewish laws that says that you have to have compassion? Just not to steal. Forget about compassion. You're not allowed to take what's not yours. And on top of that, who were the people who took the Jewish people in when we suffered for these hundreds of years? It was the Muslim and the Arab countries that we flourished. Nobody could question the fact that we lived in Egypt, that we lived in Morocco, and in Yemen, go through it, in Iran, wherever you would like, in Palestine, in Lebanon. We flourished there. And I traveled in these lands, thank God. You can still find the synagogues and the cemeteries. You can see them buried till now, and with the stories, we put out our greatest authorities, our rabbinical authorities. We flourished in these lands. So the Torah teaches us that one has to have gratitude for good that is done to us. That's the basics of what the Torah teaches a Jew. So how dare you, this group of people, come and take over the land from others and do it in the name of our religion, Judaism. It's not this Judaism, it's an ersatz Judaism. It's a transformation from godliness, from subservience to God, to nationalism. And all the rabbis around the world, we put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out. It's a compilation of the leading rabbis, the authorities from every country around the world, who all stood in opposition and said, no, this is not acceptable, this is not Judaism. It's just like Reform Judaism. You're going to change God's teachings? Who are you? What are you? Where do you come to speak about God's teachings? I'll just bring one letter, the chief rabbi of Palestine in 1947. Now wait, Israel has a rabbinate and they have a chief rabbi. That's the same like they're using the Star of David and using the name Israel. It's nothing. They simply hijacked the name Israel, which is Jacob. It's my name, Yisrael, by the way. Rabbi Yisrael is stealing my name. I have a personal vendetta with them. And so they're using the Star of David all as a tool to intimidate, to stifle, to silence anybody who will speak up, because they say, wait, we want peace. We want peace, and if you're standing up, you're an anti-Semite. Hitler just killed out 6 million Jews. I mean, they started before Hitler, by the way, 50 years before or something. But that's beside the point. But even after Hitler, the world is truly has a guilt feeling because they were silent when the Jews were dying. So they use this issue to be able to as a tool to be able to strengthen, solidify their occupation. Because anybody who wants to say a word about what they're doing, they say, you're an anti-Semite, you have to do it just like Hitler just recently. And as an aside, my grandparents died in Auschwitz, as the majority of my families, my colleague Robert Rosenberg's families, so we know what it means. We lived and breathed. My father-in-law was in Auschwitz. My first cousins died and were killed in Auschwitz. My aunts and uncles. I mean, I lived and breathed in my community. I come from immigrants. My father escaped when the Nazis went to Hungary. So basically, but they use all these concepts of fear-mongering, of that the Arabs hate the Jews, that the reason that they're being opposed in Palestine from day one. But people saw something's happening here. The Jews want to settle in the Holy Land, and I don't know, people are stopping them. So they in those days you didn't have internet, you didn't have all the ways of being able to show what's happening. So there was a few media outlets. There was radio. There was and they were well connected. So they had the mic in their hand. They were able to tell the whole world, you know what it is? A few camel riding people, Bedouins who hate Jews. They're anti-Semites, and they sold this. And it's really a land without a people for a people without a land. That is what the mantra they sold, and it was for 50 years and maybe almost many years. It's already 75 years since the state, and 100 years or more since they're occupying. But this is what they told the world, that the people opposing them are anti-Semitic. But just remember that the rabbis were starting to say, and they put on this facade that they're doing God's will, and that the right to the land is the Bible, because God gave us the land. And they counted on the ignorance of the people, that they don't know the full story of the Torah that says, no, you as Jewish people are forbidden to take over that land. You are forbidden to have your own state. So but the people, the rabbis and the Jewish communities who are true to the Torah, we stood up from day one in opposition to them. And the chief rabbi, who was the truly chief rabbi of the community of these God-fearing Jews who were living there for hundreds of years, in 1947, his name was Rabbi Dushinsky. This is the documents of the United Nations. He said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is declaration before the United Nations, July 16, 1947, before they created the state. This is in the United Nations documents. It's shoved away somewhere because they didn't listen to them. Who did they listen to? To the Zionists, who were given the power from Britain, Chaim Weizmann, the first president, and so forth. But the ones who led this community, the Jewish community that was living there, stood up and said, no, this is not what Judaism, we don't want this. So imagine, the Muslim community, the Christian community, and the Jewish community, all three of them didn't want this new monster, this thing called Zionism, and this so-called Jewish state that they flaunt the Star of David and the menorah, all this Jewish symbols and so forth. They make a rabbinate and chief rabbi. This is all a facade. It's not what Judaism is. And from that day on, by the way, I will carry many pictures of tens of thousands of Jews who gathers in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds, and who gathers around the world, in front of the United Nations, in front of the White House. Not far from you, you have Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Take a stroll through Williamsburg, Brooklyn. You'll see it's the largest concentration of religious Jews, but really religious Jews, meaning that they don't make compromises in their religion. The women go attired with modesty according to the Torah. That's required. It's not something that's extreme or what they would call ultra-religious. You know, it's nice to label people with, you know, they sound like they're a little cuckoo, they're a little off their minds. No, this is what the Torah says. Women have to dress modestly. You go, the men dress like Jews, like we did for all the years, and the distinguished rabbis, scholars, businessmen, who have family. We don't have family planning in Jewish people. We're supposed to be married by 20. So we have large families. An average was probably 6, 7 children, thank God. And these children, we send to private schools because we want our education according to the Jewish law. So we have private schooling. How much does it cost per child? You know? You know. Right? So it costs a fortune, and we pay for that for each child. So we give our lives for our religion. Yet, for some odd reason, there's not one Israeli flag in our communities. If it would be such an essential issue for Judaism to have the state, then you would think that the most religious communities would be supporting it at least somehow. So, no, they don't support it. They are opposing the state of Israel from day one. So the question, so somebody with a little common sense should step back and say, let me understand, something I'm being misled, something I don't understand in this whole quagmire, in this whole conflict. And then they would come to the realization that there's two Judaisms. There's a Judaism that was from Mount Sinai. There's a Judaism that Jews lived and breathed and died for 3,000 years. And there's a Judaism that's a convenient movement that's occupying another people. That's what they will discover. And it's not Judaism. They're piggybacking on my religion. They're using my religion. So when you're talking about peace, when a great rabbi we had in Europe, his name was Rabbi Dumbo, for less memory, he used to say, yes, we want peace. Yes, we want to live peace. They also want peace. They want a peaceful occupation. We don't want that peace. No, no. We want what it means, peace, shalom, godliness. We want that peace. And you should know, I mean, you look at pictures, you wouldn't believe, it's beyond words. The Jews are, first of all, every boy and girl who turns 17 becomes a criminal, because they refuse to serve in the mandatory service in the IDF. So our communities, they can't travel, they can't go, they can't come. You see the rest, boys and girls here. Then you can see how they're brutally beaten day and night. Every single, this is going on for 75 years, the religious community. If this would happen once in New Jersey, boy, you would have Netanyahu on a plane, demanding restitution for the state of Israel first, of course, and condemning the whole United States as being anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic means when somebody stands up like Hitler, who wanted to kill the Jews because they're Jews, and he wanted to wipe them off the map. When they're making a state, forcing an occupation on people, and because of that, people are dying in Gaza, dying and suffering. There's no words. You cannot. It's beyond, like people you were saying, you can't watch the television anymore because you can't look at the suffering. It's beyond comprehension what's going on when this is happening. And then into that's now 75 years. It didn't start on October 7th. 75 years and more. There was their Yassin, and we can go back before they started. They started to come up and started with this plan to take over the land. People started being killed, and the ones who fell into the prey to Zionism, who went along with Zionism, they also died. So you're having thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people, mostly Muslims and Christians, and also Jews, who died for this purpose. Who is anti-Semitic? Who is anti-Semitic? The Zionist state of Israel is anti-Semitic. They are anti-Semites. So when they come and they accuse everybody of being when they come and they accuse everybody of anti-Semitic, it means nothing. You find the apartheid went along on its merry way, and they were a member of the United Nations. Their ambassadors was called His Excellency. There's everybody, and anybody who stood up against it was a criminal, was a terrorist. Yeah, but at the end of the day today, if anybody would stand up and say, I have a great plan of making an apartheid state, they would rush I don't know where, we were off the stage, right? I mean, and any child will tell you that that can't be probable, it can't be understood. Now tell me something, did they consider themselves religious people in South Africa? They did. They were people who considered themselves religious people who believed in a God. And yet they practiced apartheid. So let us understand, it is possible for humanity to propagate, to commit an atrocity for years and years and years, and still go along and consider themselves elite society. So don't think just because they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, or they accuse people here of being terrorists. Now we're not condoning violence, it's October 7th, but we're saying that the root cause of October 7th, and the people should stand back and say, for 75 years, we've been playing the game of the Zionists and say, yes, we're going to make a picture like this, like that, everybody's going to be happy. How can you play that game when you see how many people died, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and how much anti-Semitism, a rift between Jews, a hate of Jews became developed in the world because of this occupation? That's criminal. You're taking a people's land that they lived there for hundreds of years with no religious right, as we explained. All the rabbis said this is not Judaism. Because they decided to have a selfish, flawed goal to have the land. We cannot stand by silently. So everybody, let me just say, and I'll finish with this. We have to pray to the Almighty, because the Almighty is almighty. Just like He brought an end to the Greek and to the Roman Empire, USSR disappeared, which also tried to stifle religion, and then you had the apartheid disappeared. God, with His compassion, could bring the speedy and peaceful dismantle. We have to pray. At the same time, we dare not be silent. Of every minute, and if you have somebody, a relative, a friend, or somebody who used to be a friend, or whatever it may be, contact them, who you feel who has power, who has some influence on the powers that can do something to help the people of Gaza. Also, they should just know that we are crying for them, that we are hurting for them. Not only for the people of Gaza, from occupied Palestine. We want, with God's help, the removal of the impediment to peace, the removal of this injustice of taking a land from another people in its entirety. God will help. This is what Judaism wants. This is not my will. This is what all our rabbis from day one till today, and we will continue with God's help to speak up. God should help. We should be successful sooner nowadays. Seeing a free Palestine, we will all serve God in harmony soon. Thank you. It's all right.
Let me just say here a few words. Just a minute. You know what happened? I met Dr. Weiss here in one of the functions before, and then in my book, Palestine Rising, you saw his picture, and if you remember the ship from the ship which came from Turkey, now he went and he embraced the man who was in the hospital. That's how much Dr. Weiss is. Okay? Now I need to pause here just 1 minute. Really, we have a hadith. It says, hadith, the Prophet says, من لا يشكر الله من لا يشكر الناس لا يشكر الله. The one who does not thank the people who good, he does not thank God. And I am just want to say here that just a logistic note. I want to.
I do recall something significant, which I must bring up here in order to further the context of what's coming next. Uri Adia talked a lot about Central Synagogue, and Hannah Toff talked a lot about Park Avenue Synagogue. According to the late Uri Adia, Central Synagogue was and with the way that things continue to go, with the clout that they still have, this would apply even today, that the Central that Central Synagogue is the most influential Jewish Reform synagogue. Hanatoff talked a lot about the Park Avenue Synagogue, which would be the most influential Jewish conservative synagogue. None of that has changed. One of the things that has been made of note of is that Park Avenue Synagogue has the best cantor in the world, and you know, as he really is that good of a cantor, I'm not going to dispute that. The point being, though, is that this 4-part series deconstructs Central Synagogue and Park Avenue Synagogue. This first part 1 of 1, goes after Central Synagogue. The rabbi speaking in this video, she is the rabbi of the Central Synagogue. This came out on January 27, 2023. And, yeah, let's do it.
Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. This line from the Talmud is the basis for our obligation to our fellow Jews. And it's a familiar one to many of us because we've used it as a rallying cry when we fought for Soviet Jewry or sponsored airlifts of Ethiopians to Israel. It follows from the meaning of that Hebrew word arev, one who underwrites another person's loan. Jews must be arevim, or guarantors, for each other, and help Jews who are in need. But that's not actually the original context of that line. Kol Yisrael arevim appears in the Talmud regarding the domino effect of sin. It comments on a challenging biblical verse that says, a person will stumble because of his brother's sin.
Wow, okay, where to begin and how not to go on a tangent on this? Wow. All right, well, let's start with this thing about the Ethiopian Jewry. The culture of Ethiopian Jewry no longer exists because half of them have become Messianic Jewish people, which therefore makes them not Jewish at all, but Christians. And then the other half have lost their context to Judaism, not taken up Rabbinite Judaism, but Zionist institutions which counterfeit Judaism, much in the same way that the Seventh-day Adventists and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints provides counterfeit Christianity to people. So, I mean, the audacity to even bring up Ethiopian Jewry here is just, wow. This woman is a freaking racist, by the way. Yeah, she is an anti-Semite because she is a Zionist. And, you know, like this gets into the problem with what has happened to, Reform, synagogues. There are still some Jewish anti-Zionist synagogues that are that do Reform Judaism. But in order to take back Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, and Reconstructionist Judaism, Bundists have to start infiltrating, or more accurately, taking back modern Orthodox Jewish synagogues. Because an unspoken truth, which we all know, but we never say, is that Reform Jewry, conservative Jewry, and Reconstructionist Jewry are all heavily dependent on modern Orthodox Jewry. And of course, ultra-Orthodox Jewry just doesn't acknowledge, the others. The thing is that I can understand why, because they stay firm in what their stances are, whereas modern Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist tend to be wishy-washy. It doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. But, and obviously, Bundism would welcome these different strands of Judaism, because the Bund is political, by the way. As in, the Bund is not religious, it's non-religious. And it can be pro-religious, and often is. But the Bund itself is political. That context means that we do not shy away from modern Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, or Reconstructionist Judaism. But there is the necessity to take it back, and to take it back for political reasons. Now, what she's saying about the domino effect from the Talmud, that's true. However, the context of which she's about to use this is wholly inappropriate. This woman is a fascist, and she considers decolonization to be genocide. And that's part of the campaign that is slowly happening, is all cries to decolonization is being called genocidal now, which is amazing. To say that decolonialization is genocidal is to say that opposition to South Africa, any opposition that was done to South Africa apartheid was therefore genocidal somehow. There is a desperation among Zionists today. But anyway, I'm trying not to rant here because there's so much to unpack with this and there's so much to get into. Let's just go to the next part of this video where this anti-Semitic rabbi, she does her little spiel, her little play on, on the context, typical and reminiscent of the centrist Zionists and how they speak. By the way, centrist Zionists and left-wing Zionists are all right-wing. There is no such thing as a centrist or left-wing Zionist. All Zionists are right-wing. The labor Zionists were the ones that carried out the Nakba, by the way. So, what good is a left-wing Zionist? Not good at all. In fact, left-wing Zionists tend to be super, super far-right because it's all right-wing. But anyway, I'm going too far. It's kind of like how Strasserism is not really left-wing Nazism. It's right-wing Nazism, but a bit smarter and more tactful. But that's not the point. All right. Fascism is fascism, people.
And here, the word arevim is best translated from the Hebrew word me'urav, or mixture. In other words, I'd translate that line, all of Israel is mixed up with each other. If a Jew sins, other Jews are implicated.
Okay, that's true. However, if Jewish people start divesting from Amalek, as where we are required, and by the way, let's be very, 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 very precise here. Amalek is a theological concept and a theological concept only. Amalek, all right, is not an ethnic tribe. The very fact that Amalek, within the Torah, Amalek is made reference to before the very birth of Amalek, which is then later mentioned. That should tell you right there. I mean, I mentioned in a previous video that Rashi condemned Jewish people who disenfranchised non-Jewish people and cheated them in any way as serving the nation of Amalek. So Amalek is actually an internal problem, not something external that's coming to destroy the Jewish people. So when the Zionists say that Palestine is Amalek, they're actually lying. They're completely lying. First of all, the Samaritan texts make no reference to Amalek, and the Samaritan texts predate the Jewish texts. So when you talk about, if you Kol Yisrael includes the Samaritans, not just Jewish people. And it does not include Medinat Yisrael, which is state of Israel, which is not Jewish at all. Medinat Yisrael is not even Yisrael. Medinat Yisrael is Medinat Amalek. So let's get Amalek correct here for a second. This woman is not of Am Yisrael. She's of Am Amalek. There, I've provided the correct context. And one of the things to be pointed out here is that I can officially give you the definition, the actual definition between the difference between Zionism and Jewish supremacy. Zionism is not Jewish supremacy. Zionism is white supremacy, even if a black person is doing it. And yes, black people have been known to carry out white supremacy on black people. So understand that, this gets into what whiteness is and all that other stuff, how colonial whiteness is, that it's a form of nepotism. And, white Europeans have lost their culture and absorbed into whiteness. And this is the colonialism within Europe before the settler colonialism that branched out to other places. So, I mean, I don't want to confuse matters, but we are responsible for what we do. However, when we are outcrying and telling the truth, as we have for decades now, that the state of Israel not only does not speak for us, it was built against our cries to the contrary. There is something there's a book that Rabbi Weiss, has expressed, and anybody who views this channel should be aware of this by now. As was shown in the beginning of this video, the rabbis speak out. Natiri Karta encourages people to read this book. Those are actual quotes from the actual rabbinical councils. They all, in unison, opposed the creation of a so-called Jewish state. So the way you have to understand is Zionism is not a Jewish issue, but there is a collective Jewish responsibility to oppose it. Now, in that context, what should be understood is this bitch should speak for herself. She is implicated. I'm not implicated, and neither are any of my Jewish friends or family or any of us. We are not implicated with her. We merely have the obligation to oppose Zionism, which includes her. All Zionists, which include her. So when she's saying, Kol Yisrael, what she really is saying is Kol Amalek. Because she's not part of Am Yisrael, she's part of Am Amalek. Anyway, I just I had to get that out there. Oh man, this is going to be quite the video. I mean, how are we doing so far? I don't know. That'll be up to people's own opinion. But like this woman and the lies that she says, they must be deconstructed. All right, let's continue with the Shishka that pretends to be Jewish.
We are all responsible. This Jewish value of kinship and responsibility is at the core of the heightened struggle that many American Jews are feeling today when it comes to our relationship with Israel. How much are we mixed up with or responsible for our symbolic and literal family?
I have no family in the Zionist state, and a great many Jewish people within the United States and Canada do have a family within the Zionist state, and that family has disowned them, and they've disowned that family. And while that is not always the case, that is more the case than is allowed to be said. I say is allowed to be said because it should be apparent at this point that the Bundes movement is actually here to combat the censorship, which is being made more and more apparent. Let me tell you the difference between Jewish supremacy and Zionism, okay? First of all, we are in the Hanukkah season, and the whole point of Hanukkah is resistance to assimilation. What the Maccabees did by reclaiming Judea and giving it back to the Jewish Judeans and opposing the Hellenized Judeans, that was a good thing. That was perfectly necessary. However, the Maccabee reign over Judea afterwards was Jewish supremacy. And the reason why we know this is because Edom, that's basically the Edomites, and if you know, to put some context, Israelites, Edomites. Israelites are from Jacob, Edomites are from Esau, okay? The Edomites were forced to convert to Judaism. This is Jewish supremacy, okay? It's one of the reasons why we don't proselytize anymore. So, you want to know the difference between Zionism and Jewish supremacy? I just provided one. Now, some would say Ezra was doing Jewish supremacy. No, he wasn't. Ezra did Judean supremacy, which I actually do believe was a good thing back in those days, and Dr. Weisfeld completely disagrees. Now, to be fair, one of the primary reasons, and I need to be fair about this because it's not so much that Dr. Weisfeld doesn't have an argument in this area, he does, and I like to provide both sides of the argument because that is the Jewish thing to do. This can be viewed with the way the people works. All right, so Dr. Weisfeld cringes at the concept of Ezra because Ezra was the one that started what we know today as the Jewish texts. The addition to Amalek is in there, and Dr. Weisfeld perceives this as a way to excuse genocide. I don't see it that way. However, it cannot be watered down the fact that that's when the descendants of Judea started to look at the Samaritans as not part of the same Am Yisrael, and that's a mistake. Now, anybody that knows who I am knows that I constantly defend the Talmud, because if you take the Talmud away from Jewish people, you end up with Zionism typically. That's why Karaite Judaism is not Judaism, despite what the Rambam said. And by the way, it is okay to disagree with the Rambam. What do you think the Zohar is about? The Zohar, humane. Rambam, kind of pretentious. Now, at the same time, I will make it clear that the Rambam was a good scholar, and he is kosher to read, but so is the Zohar. So, like, I'm slightly giving a slant to my opinion, but I'm trying to show you the other side of it. The point being, though, is that Ezra was not even a Jewish supremacist. He was a Judean supremacist, and that was the period of Judean supremacy for the sake of the Judeans. But starting from there, not the Talmud, starting from there, that's where this disenfranchisement against the Samaritans starts. It doesn't start in the Talmud. So you can't say the Talmud is inherently anti-Samaritan, because it's not. However, the hangover remains in the Talmud to disenfranchise the Samaritans. Which is not good, but this is also why I believe Orthodox Judaism, by the way, is more of a multiple choice religion. A good example of that is Ashkenazim traditionally in the Orthodox circles won't let you have rice on Pesach. By the way, Pesach is Hebrew for Passover. They won't let you have rice. In Sephardim, we do typically have rice on Pesach. There are reasons. I've mentioned the reasons before. I don't want to get into it because I think I'm taking up too much time here. But the point being is that's a clear difference within the Orthodox. Okay? Now, I have my own project for Orthodox Judaism, which I cannot do right now. The reason is because I'm still wrapped up with the Bund. I cannot be both a Bundist and somebody providing solutions for Orthodox Judaism at the same time. That could be considered a conflict of interest on the religious side. So while I have my own ideas for Orthodox Judaism, they are primarily suspended as long as I'm working as an activist for the Bund, which I still am, and I will be until my work is done, because I have a lot of promises that I have to keep. Promises I've made to Dr. Weisfeld, promises I've made to Maoists, promises I've made to anarchists, promises I've made to other Jewish people, promises I've made to recovering drug addicts, by the way. Promises that some of Dr. Weisfeld's friends don't know that I even made to them, because I didn't actually directly promise them, but I told myself I'm going to do this for them, because there is something I want to do for Dr. Weisfeld's friends / extended family in Nablus, and I will be working on. I've been working on that soon, so I have to handle all of that before I work on my own project for Orthodox Judaism. Which, to work on that project for Orthodox Judaism, I have to retire from the Bund, which I cannot do at this time. One of the reasons why it's so important, however, to understand these things is because this woman here, she's twisting things, and she's doing it deliberately. I don't believe for 1 second that she's just badly cultured. No, she clearly knows her Hebrew. She won't use any Yiddish, though, and Reform, while Reform is no longer exclusively Ashkenazi, because there's actually quite a few Mizrahim who are Reform. Reform was an Ashkenazi movement in its origins, and you never see her really use Yiddish that much. I mean, maybe once or twice, maybe she has. I really don't like to watch stuff on Central Synagogue. I do sometimes, but I find it harder to watch her than to watch the rabbi on Park Avenue Synagogue. While I would say that he is guilty of the same things she is, she's harder to watch. The hypocrisy of Central Synagogue is extreme. For one thing, they claim equality of the sexes, male and female. And yet,
if you look at the mannerisms of their cantors and some of their male members, in leadership, they sit like cowboys with their legs open and everything, and the women have their legs closed, in modesty. I appreciate that because I would rather personally, coming from an Orthodox background, see women having their legs closed. But I have to admit that I've had to keep my legs closed when sitting down, because if women are of the position of having an egalitarian position, it's best to respect them, because, even if you believe in traditional roles, there can be no denial that there has been abuse by males. But the point I'm making is the Central Synagogue preaches some sort of egalitarian equality between men and women, which they do not practice. And this woman, should be like chastising the men in her congregation, but she never does. Because really, she's a front for male chauvinists. Yes, I am making that charge. I don't need to prove that charge. This is common knowledge to anybody who's ever been around these congregations. This is a systemic issue within Reform Judaism. They do not tell you the difference between Zionism and Jewish supremacy because they don't even want to acknowledge that Zionism is formed, because then they would have to admit that they're heretics. Anyway, that was quite the rampage of words I just used. But these things have to be said. So we're going to go now to the next clip of this heretic, this anti-Semite pretending to be Jewish. Even if her mother was Jewish, that doesn't make her Jewish. She's divested. She's Amalek, not Yisrael.
An ocean away. It was one thing to feel responsible when Israel needed guarantors, as American Jews felt when Israel was a fledgling young state in need of our aid and our philanthropic dollars. But it's quite another thing to feel responsible for behaviors and decisions of a government we might not agree with, one that we did not elect. And this is all coming to a potential boiling point as Israel recently elected its most far right-wing government in its history, one that has placed religious extremists and ultranationalists in positions of leadership, who are unabashedly racist against Palestinians, who discriminate against the LGBTQ community, who believe Reform Jews are ruining Judaism, who plan continued annexation of West Bank settlements, who are legislating overrides of Supreme Court decisions, and they're doing this all in the name of Judaism. In a moment like this, it is particularly tempting to wash our hands of this government, to turn away from Israel, and many are. A conservative colleague and lifelong Zionist publicly wrote recently about why he will no longer offer the prayer for the state of Israel in his synagogue. Abe Foxman, who in his decades leading the ADL was chief bulldog on behalf of Israel, said most recently, "If Israel ceases to be an open democracy, I will not be able to support it."
I remember the article with A.B. Foxman, for the first time ever being kind of critical of Israel, the state of Israel. I don't like to call the state of Israel Israel. I don't like doing that. That is one of the worst things about the state of Israel, is that it's called Israel, when Israel is the collectivity of the Jewish people as a whole. By definition of what we consider to be Jewish, technically the Samaritans would be Jewish as well, but they would reject that term. The term Jewish or Yehudi in Hebrew doesn't actually come from the word Yehuda. That is a big misnomer. Most Jewish people do think that this is the case, but actually the word Yehuda comes from the term Yehud. Yod, He, Vav, Dalet, which is a safer way of saying Yod, He, Vav, and He. Notice I put and between Vav and He because that's very sacred, the Tetranonomicon. This is also which is the word that Jehovah is mistranslated from, and I'm saying Jehovah would be a terrible mistranslation. I'm trying not to get off track here, but this is a very frustrating thing to give commentary towards. So, but please be sure that
it is okay for Jewish people to have disagreements. I'm trying to highlight disagreements between me and Dr. Weisfeld to show that to everybody, that there are disagreements. For instance, I'm pretty sure Dr. Weisfeld and I disagree largely about Ezra, but not completely. We both would say that he was an editor, because he was. The guy wasn't even a prophet. I publicly said this on his channel. The guy was really just an editor. There are questions that could be asked. Was he a Zionist? No. But he was he a Jewish supremacist? No, he was a Judean supremacist. Jewish supremacists would be the Maccabees after they took power. Well, what about Bar Kokhba? No, Bar Kokhba is the start of Zionism. And so we do have to understand that, yes, Jewish supremacy could lead to Zionism, but they're not the same. And why is that? Why am I still going on about that? I'm going on about that because this woman is trying to... She's declaring war on the Jewish people. This is before October 7th. So for those who really didn't care until October 7th, let me provide you more context here. At the beginning of 2023, the State of Israel declared war on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I believe in the old city of Jerusalem. I believe in its four quarters. I believe in the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. If we could remove the market from that, that would be the third temple upon Zion. And if we want a third temple that resembles the Temple of Solomon, you could put it on Mount Gerizim. And yeah, oh, that would mean we would have to acknowledge the Samaritans as Jewish, and all I can say about that is good. But to do that, you have to acknowledge Palestine, and there cannot be a state of Israel. Oh, like this thing that this woman spouts, this like, oh, both sides are hostile. Israel and Palestine, they're both hostile. No, Israel is a settler colonial country. It's not even Israel. It's Amalek. It's the state, the neo-colonial fascist state of Israel. You know, what this proves is that neo-colonialism is worse than colonialism. Neo-colonialism is more fascist than colonialism because of the fact that it takes victims and turns them into the same thing as their oppressors, which then often surpass. As Dr. Weisfeld said, one genocide does not... No, he didn't even put it that way. One Holocaust does not justify another, and it is absolutely correct. One Holocaust does not justify another. This centrist narrative that this woman is spewing is okay. So, yeah, so you can see that she's panicking. She is proof that the Zionists are getting desperate. The thing that one must understand about the common Zionist within the United States, I wouldn't be so sure about the ones in Canada, but the ones in the United States, the common trend among the Zionists within the United States that go to Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist synagogues, the common trend you'll see is a sort of, we want a two-state solution, and there's extremist Israelis and extremist Palestinians, when it's like, no, there's desperate measures. You know, as I record this, you know, and I've had to reconsider what angles, and I've had to prep myself. I mean, you know, like literally, like I'll be in, you know, outside where I think I'm hopefully in isolation, and I'll practice these little speeches. And, you know, I finally started to figure out how I'm going to approach commenting towards this woman. And this woman, you know, she's probably very disappointed, you know, with the pause, you know, that's going on with, you know, with the Israel-Hamas war. But make no mistake, the type of systematic genocide that the Zionists did to Gaza. And by the way, as I personally record this, for the sake of the channel, as I do this, we're on day 4 of the pause. We don't even know where it's going from here. You know, I typically don't like to say when I'm doing things when I do these recordings, but this series is kind of meant to be as in real time as possible for the events going on, because this is a crisis going on. You know, we talk about, oh, we support, you know, the oppressed, but as we're saying that, understand that right now there are people dying. Right now there are people being murdered because of a fascist, racist, colonial ideology. Right now there are children who are dead, children who are dying, children who have been decapitated because of the state of Israel. You know, I don't condone necessarily taking hostages, but it gets back to the point. What Hamas did was an act of desperation. The simple solution to this, and it is a simple solution, is dismantle the state of Israel. It has no right to exist. And the other solution, it's time for collectivity of the Europeans to take responsibility for the Holocaust. It is not the Palestinians that must pay for the Holocaust. It is Europeans collectively. Now, even if you're born into innocence as a European, the question must be asked, are you a beneficiary of genocide? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to continue to go. It's so hard to condense these thoughts down. But as this occurs and as this unfolds, and as Dr. Weisfeld, tries to gather more support, and then there's often crickets because the people often that he would associate with are his age, and yet he's still active when he needs more fresh blood involved. It just makes me angry because I know more people would be interested if the reach we had to communicating this was larger. It turns out that we're not as alone as we think we are. But do we even know each other? I'm talking about people with the same agenda for justice.
I see these as principled protests, but they threaten a detachment that we cannot afford. We cannot walk away from the most important and consequential sovereign project of the Jewish people in modern history. Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh. All of Israel is inextricably linked to each other. We are responsible. If Israel tries to turn its back on the right of return for many Jews, or rule by tyranny or theocracy rather than democracy, or weaken the already troubled rights of Palestinian citizens, we need to roll up our sleeves and open our pocketbooks and invest in the civil society and democracy and religious pluralism and human rights that we say we support. Fortunately, the tens of thousands protesting in the streets of Tel Aviv in the last 3 weekends are a shot of hope. The people who are most affected by these new policies are refusing to accept them quietly. But I'm also well aware that these political tensions have also escalated a sequence of violence already. 9 Palestinians killed in an Israeli army raid in Jenin yesterday. Today, at least 7 Israelis shot dead in a terrorist attack outside a synagogue in East Jerusalem as Shabbat was beginning. When will this violence stop? Only when we refuse to be hijacked by violent extremists on either side. Only when we see a long game and invest in the education and infrastructure and relationships, which are the only true building blocks for a different outcome. It would be very easy to despair, and I am definitely been there in recent weeks. But I also had the fortune of being in Israel just a few weeks ago, and I spent time with people who do not have the luxury to give up hope.
This woman has Tel Aviv on the mind, you can tell. All right, so for those who are unaware of the culture of the Zionist state and how a lot of its history is, Tel Aviv is known for its rainbow flags, its pro-LGBTQ, safety net that it is, and the dangerous, homophobic, transphobic Palestinians want to tear it away from them. When really, now all of a sudden, the state of Israel, is in this big, what the heck has just happened to our precious democracy now that a right-wing theocratic government has taken over? Except that this gets into why the word theocracy is suspect to begin with. In Demarchist circles, it is unresolved whether there even is an actual such thing as theocracy. Not a lot of people are aware of that because the Demarchist publications have not all been published, and a lot of that is out of my hands. I mean, I am working consistently to get those writings to be published, and it will be done. But, a lot of it is not in my hands because I'm not the one who oversees, those works, you know, and who holds them. It's out of my hands, mostly. And besides, my years working with the Maoist Rebel News Network has made a lot of the other demarchists very upset with me. And I'm not trying to, you know, like, draw out drama. It's just that there's so much I know that's true that is being disconnected from reality by the words of this woman. So the state of Israel with its right-wing government is not a theocracy. Let's put something into perspective here. The Amish are considered by most people living in a society that is theocratic, but this isn't the case. What they are is a religious commune. By definition, they are a religious commune. Another good example of this would be that many people consider the Islamic Republic of Iran to be a theocracy. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a democracy, not a theocracy. You may say that they have a type of social theocracy, but even that word could be suspect. Another great example of this is that, okay, so a theocracy apparently would be the Sikh kingdoms or empires or whatever you would call it. They really weren't empires, though. But they weren't kingdoms, so most people call them theocracies, except that they had religious affairs and secular affairs and the civic rule above both. And this is why, and I need to clarify this, when you hear me or anybody else that has a demarchist position talk about secularism being the culture of capitalism, understand that I'm not the first person to say that, and it is not incorrect. There is essentially two kinds of secularism. And I'm not speaking for myself here. I'm speaking for years and years of research on this. There's anti-religion secularism, and then there's inclusive secularism. Anti-religion secularism is seen through the new atheists, where they want to blame everything on religion and then they persecute religion. Inclusive secularism is basically the claim that all religious groups are equal, and then usually whatever the dominant religious group in that society is takes hold of it. We see this with the United States. The secularism of the United States is inclusive secularism, and it's always run by Christendom. So, what is secular and what is secularism? Secular is not secularism, and that's why you got to be careful of isms and make sure they're in their correct context. To say Judaism, that is a correct ism. To say Buddhism, that is a correct ism. To say communism, that is a correct ism. To say anarchism, that is a correct ism. But when you say secularism, you are being ideological. Secular, lowercase verb, the verb secular, goes in front of words like school, court, and hospital. So the best way to make a hospital is to have a secular hospital. The best way to have a school is to have a secular school, and the best way to have a court system is to have a secular court system. I am for secular court systems, I am for secular hospitals, and I am for secular schools. Because that is inclusive, but not secularism. And that's very important to understand. So the very word theocracy is suspect. Is there even a such thing as theocracy? And this is why I believe the principle of anti-Westernism is still as valid as ever, because we neglect to understand how much we all speak in Western terms, even if you're somewhere else. And where is the West? You cannot point to any location in the world and say it's the West. This whole concept of Western civilization comes from the Western Church. And you can see the Western Church moving through this so-called Jewish woman. I don't believe in disenfranchising anybody that's Jewish. As somebody that's constantly had to deal with this because of my disagreement with the very existence of the State of Israel, I do not like to point at anybody Jewish and say, you're not really Jewish. But in the case of this woman, I will make an exception. This woman is not Jewish. This woman is a heretic. This woman is from Amalek. She is calling the State of Israel's current situation theocratic when it's not. Its current situation is fascist. It's called fascist. And there is no both sides of extremism. The State of Israel is the predator. The Palestinian people, the Palestinian nation, is the victim, looking for their liberation. That's all there is to it.
I saw Central Synagogue's former intern, Rabbi Cantor Shani Ben Or. Shani is working at Hebrew University, a campus where 18% of its student body are Palestinian students. But unsurprisingly, They are completely segregated from the Israeli Jewish student body. With visionary funding from the Schusterman Foundation, Shani is running several programs to engage dialogue, leadership training, social service work between Israeli Jewish students and Palestinian students. I got to sit in on 2 different groups and was so inspired by the genuine relationships they were building, despite the very honest challenges they expressed that they are facing every day. I also got to meet with Palestinian leader Rana Fahum, an esteemed educator who was recently named the director of Hartman's new Center for Shared Society. She is deeply critical of the new government, and she can also be critical of the Palestinian leadership. But she feels this heightened moment has given energy and an urgency to her work. Just the fact that a highly respected, connected Palestinian citizen is willing to work at an unabashedly Zionist organization in order to build shared society gives me some measure of hope.
I have a question for you then, Rabbi. Is she really doing it because she wants to reach out to Zionism or because she wants to work with Jewish people? The thing about the Palestinians that seems to elude a lot of the world is that Palestinians do not hate Jewish people, and they would rather work with Jewish people. And they have been coerced into accepting the Zionist state en masse. The majority of Palestinian people would be, by your definition, extremists. Just listen to this. Like, this is why liberal talking points are such garbage. This woman just spewed a word salad of non sequitur after non sequitur, having no value at all except to basically the obvious purpose is so that it's okay to still be a Zionist. It's okay to support the state of Israel. It doesn't matter that the Palestinians are the oppressed group. It doesn't matter. We have bribed some Palestinians to go along with Zionism. Yay! We're so morally superior because of our superiority. Because what? Reasons that are not found in the Torah, that are not found in any Talmudic passages, not found in any midrash. I mean, no, just Zionist reasoning. You want a poster boy for Zionism? Look at the early Zionists. They were secularists. They were for secularism. Again, please separate the concept of secular from secularism. And this gets back into another thing. Democracy is a precious thing, but democracy is not democracy without direct democracy. The state of Israel pretends to be a democracy, but this bourgeois democracy that is the state of Israel is more than just a bourgeois democracy. It's an apartheid. It's a settler colonial country. The nation state itself, which unfortunately communists don't seem to think is that important to dismantle, is at the root of this problem. Collectively, Europeans, both within Europe and on settler colonial countries, need to start paying for what happened in the Holocaust, paying reparations to Jewish people and to Palestinians. And we Jewish people, we have the obligation to go to civil war. It's not even civil war because there's no division here in that sense. We have the obligation to go to war against the state of Israel. And yes, Judaism is being criminalized as terrorist as we speak because Neturei Karta speaks for the Jewish nation. Central Synagogue does not. Now, does the Boon speak for the Jewish nation? The Boon speaks for the modern Orthodox Jewish people, the Reformed Jewish people, the conservative Jewish people, and the Reconstructionist Jewish people. We cannot claim to speak for the ultra-Orthodox, but if anybody ultra-Orthodox wants to be a Bundist, we're definitely not going to say no to them. I'm doing my best to put this in full perspective, but it is very hard to respond to how this woman speaks. I do hope that the following videos will not be as ranty on these subjects, but this is the starting point. I also hope that I did, my best to also show the difference between myself and Dr. Weisfeld and how we look at these. And it's important to see that the thing with me and Dr. Weisfeld, we are Jewish. Our disagreements work within a Jewish context. Our disagreements with this woman is not a disagreement. Our disagreements with this woman is Jewish versus Zionist. Me and Dr. Weisfeld, we are Jewish. Despite how much she has completely betrayed everybody around her, even Donna Newman is Jewish. Okay, there is some serious disagreement. Portrayal of Jewish people among Jewish people. There you go. Not this woman. This woman is a Zionist. She is of Amalek. Amalek, not Yisrael. Continuing.
These are some of the stories we rarely hear about here, and these are the initiatives we should be talking about and supporting. I'm traveling again to Israel in February as part of the advisory board of the Partnership for Peace Fund, which is a $250 million allocation from Congress in partnership with USAID to invest in economic, social, and political people-to-people partnerships between Palestinians and Israeli Jews. It passed with bipartisan support. These are your taxpayer dollars at work.
Ein milim, there are no words. Okay, actually, there are words to say about this. So, you just heard it from the horse's mouth. Your tax dollars go to on bipartisan support. Like, wow. Like, actually, no, I was right. I was absolutely correct the first time. Ein milim, there are no words.
These projects support the very intensive education and economic and social infrastructure work that are the building blocks for a shared society. We might not see the impact of these initiatives for years, but we cannot desist from doing this work, and I'm grateful that the United States is supporting it.
The United States and State of Israel have the most parallels between two countries. That does not mean that there are not sharp differences. I will give you a sharp difference right now. With the culture around the United States of America is one that doesn't trust government, yet is hopelessly dependent on government. Within the United States of America, the culture is untrusting towards its own government by its very nature. Paranoia of the government is part of the American culture. Within the State of Israel, the reverse is the case. In the State of Israel, hopeless devotion to the state is all that matters ultimately. That's all that's ever cared about. That's why when one party takes the government, there's all this uproar, and and then they have to put their party in, and then they take the state, and then there's all this uproar from those that had the power but have now been disempowered. It's just a cycle of mutual self-inflicted abuse, basically. Now, those are the sharp difference. That's the sharp difference between the United States of America and the State of Israel. The similarity is basically this. What does Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the United States of America, and the State of Israel all have in common? They are all British settler colonial projects. But the big similarity that should be noticed is both the State of Israel and the United States of America are British settler colonial projects that divested from British rule. So there is a sort of bond between the two. There's a sort of essential bond between the United States of America and the State of Israel. If anybody takes Orthodox Judaism seriously in the context of Tikkun Olam, one would note that Chabad Lubavitch is completely heretical by saying, well, you don't have to be a Christian, you could just be a Noahide, follow these 7 laws, and then we created a religion for all the Goyim. That's not how it works, though. If you take the Talmud seriously, which if you should, because if you don't take the Talmud seriously, you're not very Jewish, honestly, because that is the Torah culture. I mean, atheists who are born of Jewish mothers still seat themselves in the Talmud because it's probably to this day the most intense intellectual exercise in the world. If anybody who's ever seen me and Dr. Weisfeld argue already should know that a lot of that is Talmudic, background that does that, a culture of books, but I'm getting a little bit off track. The State of Israel, Chabad Lubavitch, and the Likud party really are all under the control of Kahanists, and Kahanists are not a aberration in any way of Zionism. They are the logical conclusion of Zionism. But back to the Noahide thing.
the Native Americans and First Nations peoples, majority of them would constitute Noahides because the Talmud speaks of the Noahides as already existing. So if we are for Tikkun Olam, and if you're not for Tikkun Olam, you're not really hardly Jewish at all. But if you're for Tikkun Olam, you should be looking for the Noahide nations. Well, who are the Noahide nations? Native Americans and First Nations peoples. Like, really? No need to create a new Noahide religion. There is no Noahide religion. Noahides are nations which follow these 7 laws, which are actually the 7 laws of civilization itself. But those that actually follow it are, again, the Native Americans and the First Nations people. And this is a thing that is taboo to talk about, but it is the truth. And so there is a connection between the disenfranchised Jewish diaspora nation, which is not allowed to represent itself and can only find a voice through the Bund, and the real Noahides, who are indigenous, the Palestinians, who are indigenous, and there's a parallel between Mexica and Palestinian. For instance, the Mexica, which are often known as Mexicans, the native Mexicans have to say that they're Latino or Hispanic when they check out, their demographics on, any paperwork. They are called immigrants when they are native to the land. They are not Hispanic or Latino, they are indigenous, and a lot of them don't even know it. Okay, the Palestinians are the ancient Israelis, yet they're made out to be like a force that, they're just another Arab people that shouldn't be there, when that's not even the case. And then you got the Jewish nation. We are not an ethnicity. We are not a racial group. We are a cultural religious group. Okay, we're such an ancient cultural religious group that, as I stated before, the atheists and the agnostics amongst us still find themselves wrapped up in Judaism. Okay? There is this amazing parallel between all that, and the big thing which holds back all of this from everybody putting 2 and 2 together is Zionism and Americanism. That was quite the rant, but that's the best way I can respond to this. This is just absolutely, disgusting what this woman says, and yet the majority of numbskulls who watch her are going to think, wow, she's so progressive. The dissent is so radical. Like, no, absolutely not. This woman is a fascist.
And last week I participated in a think tank organized by the Hartman Institute, Israel Policy Forum, and Encounter. They brought 35 rabbis from North America, leaders of our movements, our rabbinical seminaries, our largest synagogues, from Reform to Orthodox, to come and think about how we might constructively rethink the relationship between American Jews and Israel. I'll tell you, 35 rabbis don't agree about much, but there was a consensus that we could no longer talk about the safety and security of Israelis separate from the flourishing and the security and the safety of Palestinians as well. And it seems that our Torah portion this week supports this reframing.
Again, this sounds so progressive to a lot of numbskulls who really just do not understand the 70 plus, I guess now 75 years of genocide and bloodshed. Since October 7th, we've witnessed literally another Holocaust in motion. And that's not an exaggeration. As Dr. Weisfeld has said recently, one Holocaust does not justify another. Yes, we should care about Palestinian liberation, but that liberation must be understood in the context that they are suffering under an occupation, that the Zionists are colonial. Nothing she says changes that. And, the United States of America should be dismantled along with the State of Israel. I mean, really, so must, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. But the dire need to remove the United States of America and the State of Israel is growing all the time. I am happy to see how much American morale is just dying and dying fast.
One of the I used to tolerate constitutionalists. I used to think that they made decent allies, not friends, not comrades, but decent allies. But the truth is, what is constitutionalism? Constitutionalism is a early 20th century, reinterpretation of the Bill of Rights. Completely fantasy. It's not truth. Screw the constitutionalists. Americanism is the reality of the United States of America. Constitutionalism is the illusion, and it's an illusion that's dead. Superman is dead. The ultimate immigrant from Krypton never stood a chance. The kryptonite he had, reality. It's all over. The dream is over. It's time to wake up from it. As Comrade Sy had said in 2020, it's time to wake up. The American dream is a lie. It is time to wake up. Justice, justice you shall pursue. In the Torah culture, this is what we are taught. And no justice, no peace. And there can be no peace without justice, and therefore for justice to reign, the state of Israel must be completely dismantled. The indigenous Palestinians must have their lands returned to them. The right of return granted for the Palestinians. The Zionist right of return debunked. Think of this. When the Zionists attacked, Gaza this year, committing a mass genocide, they killed Israeli citizens in the process. This whole notion of extremism on both sides just isn't true. I denounce Central Synagogue, and I denounce this rabbi.
We're in Parshat Bo, the Exodus story amidst the plagues, and God brings a plague of darkness on the Egyptians. But the text continues, the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Great. The Israelites had light, but we were still not free. And how foolish to think that we can overcome our enslavement when our neighbors are sitting in darkness, so thick they can touch it. I thought of the great sin of ultranationalism, which is to fight for light for your own without regard for the moral price for others. Or the sin of religious extremism, which is believing that you have the exclusive claim to God's light and truth. These are the plagues that infect Israel's government today. Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All of Israel is mixed up with and responsible to each other. We must understand that this mandate is not just about how Jews relate to their same kind of fellow Jew, but to the Jew who observes differently, or maybe doesn't pray at all. And maybe even more challenging, we have to understand that this mandate is not just about how Israel must relate to its Jewish citizens, but to all Israeli citizens, Jewish, Palestinian, Druze, Christian, Muslim, and also those living under Israel's military control. We are responsible for all Israel. We are mixed up on that land together. We can't feel comfortable sitting in the light of sovereignty next to a community living in darkness and expect to have peace. We cannot allow some Jews to claim the light of authenticity while they relegate the rest of us Jews to the darkness of fraudulence. Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All Israel is inextricably linked to one another. Our fates are bound up with each other. So let us be guarantors for each other and work towards a shared destiny that can actually bring light to all people.
In Orthodox synagogues, they would not, and I'm pretty sure even modern Orthodox synagogues, they're not into this idea of recording sermons. This is something that Reform does. This is something that Conservative does. This is something that Reconstructionist does, but this is not like the Orthodox thing. I Um, I really can't stand this woman, and I think the part that bothers me is the liberal tone, the liberal way of speaking. That's ultimately what I find the most offensive about this, because it's more easy to confront her when she's showing her true colors, which there will be an opportunity for that. But, you know, anytime I showed this video to anybody, they said, oh, well, she's so progressive. I'm like, no, she's really not. She's another fascist. And she's the kind of fascist that calls the victims fascists. That's what's so sick and twisted about the Zionists. I'm now going to bring this to the Here and Now episode from Dr. Weisfeld's channel, which came out on November 11th, 2023. This is basically mostly a dialogue between Dr. Weisfeld and Ahmad of Palestine. Steve Struggle is there for most of the part, but he doesn't really say that much. I think he was having technical difficulties, but this is a great eye-opener here. The headlines that Dr. Weisfeld gave to this, I'm going to try to read this for you. This Hannibal directive in action, killing hostages, the political economy of Gaza's strategic assets, and the ongoing genocide. Hyphen. And are you ready for this, comrades? I like this, and I hear other people saying it, but Dr. Weisfeld, I'm pretty sure, said it first. Here's the quote straight from him in the description as well. One Holocaust does not justify another.
Here now, here we are on with the war on, and there's reason to believe that it's going to continue. Ahmed, what is your current evaluation of this war on the Palestinian people, this genocidal war?
Well, it's day 36 of the genocide that started, and day 16, I believe, on so-called land invasion. The total, unofficial total of murdered Palestinians are closing to 15,000, including those under the rubble, maybe more. We don't know, because nobody can reach those buildings, and close to 30,000 injured, many severely injured. The healthcare is in total collapse. There's no electricity. There's no fuel for generators in the hospitals, especially the hospitals in Gaza proper, whereas the onslaught of the Zionist land invasion is occurring as we speak. They're trying to reach Al-Shifa health complex. It's a complex, not just a hospital, which provide a lot of to the Gazans. They've been attacked as we speak. The resistance is steadfasting and inflicting heavy casualties on the invading Zionist army in many different fronts: northeast, northwest, southwest, and southeast. Southwest, where there's a Shifa hospital, and southwest with the Shifa hospital, southeast with Al-Quds hospital. Al-Quds hospital, I heard now it's been encircled by the Zionists. They're about to enter it and maybe commit another big massacre. There's thousands of civilians living are taking refuge in those two big hospitals. The estimated numbers in both hospitals about 50,000 civilians. So we don't know yet what the picture. The Zionists being held at bay by the resistance, who've been fighting this battle of the two sides, the two hospitals, for the past 15 hours. The world is watching. Today, the Arab and Islamic Summit did nothing, absolutely just lip service to calling for ceasefire, nothing else. And the massacre is, or the genocide actually, It's unfolding before our own eyes for the past 36 days live. That's my take on what's going on.
You know, this is a replication of the 1947 Nakba, 1947 to 1949, when the Zionist militias weren't even an army. They were just, terrorist bands, calling themselves, labor Zionist, fancy names, revisionists, and all this sort of stuff. And they carried out massacres of the Palestinians in order to induce a mass exodus of the population. And if they wouldn't have left, then they would have been killed. And they knew it.
That's true.
None of this nonsense about, returning in 2 weeks. That was just a BBC Arabic broadcast that was meant to deceive, from the British support to the Zionists.
This is what I mean when I say that Zionism, the Zionists, all of the Zionists that started the different strands of Zionism are the poster boys of secularism, not secular. Secular, mind you, is a verb which applies to certain kinds of facets within civil society. And one of the problems that Bundists have with Marxist-Leninists typically, despite the fact that Bundists and Marxist-Leninists actually have a lot in common, but one of the big differences is that Bundists, we emphasize that the civil society does not require the state. Not really. And we would ask, even if you were to do a dictatorship of the proletariat, can you make it more provisional? And they would probably say, no, it needs to be an ongoing thing until, they can, get rid of all class antagonisms. In the process, though, they create more class antagonisms because there is an actual to-the-hip connection between the state and the market. And prior to the market, even before the market, there were other things that were connected to the hip, to the state, that made the state function the way that the state has always functioned. Civil society is supposed to protect secular and religious institutions. Religious as a verb in front of another word. So, for instance, there's no reason why you couldn't go to both a secular school and a religious school. A secular school would be inclusive to everybody, and religious schools for, whatever it is that you need, rather than trying to mix the two, as often is done with, Catholic schools. You could have a secular Catholic school or a secular Jewish school. That is actually possible. But this gets into what I mean by secular. And not just what I mean. There's many people who've pointed out this. Why secularism? Why the ism? Ism is ideological. Secular, for instance, is a verb, not a noun. So secular schools, secular courts, and secular hospitals. This is in its perfect context. But when you want to know what secularism in motion is, look at the Zionists. That's actually those are the poster boys of secularism. When you take the secular facet of civil society and you turn that into an ideological concept, you create something dangerous. And it gets into another thing, whether theocracy ever existed or not, because by definition, what people would actually point to within North America, if they wanted to explain, theocracy, they'd usually point at the Amish, except if you really look at the Amish, the proper definition for them would be that they are actually a religious commune. It gets into the thing, was there ever such a thing as theocracy? I lean more towards no. Right now, people are saying that the state of Israel is being theocratic. No, the state of Israel is being fascist. Like there's this, you ever notice how people try to label things theocracy in order to avoid the part that it's fascist? The Nakba was a genocide. This current Nakba 2.0, which they are boasting, they had been boasting, they had been literally boasting in the government that that's what they wanted. This was like the politicians, the people in power were saying this. This is fascism. And the Likud party is a fascist party. But let's continue.
Same thing's happening now. And they were very overt about it. They said so themselves. It was incredible to see, these, government spokespersons, saying the same things, the historians, have described, as having taken place in the Nakba.
Yes.
But the opposition is magnificent. Steve, now in the United States, there's, huge demonstrations taking place as well, isn't there?
Yes, there have been a series of demonstrations across the country in subsequent weeks. Last weekend, upwards of 400,000 people demonstrated in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C. There are other demonstrations the week prior, so there have been many demonstrations. However, the U.S. Congress has censured one of the squad for making pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian statements, which they call them anti-Jewish statements. So any politician who speaks up, even around the issue of ceasefire, is threatened with sanction or retaliation because they're simply recognizing that there is growing disagreement in the United States behind the United States supported campaign of Israel against the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people. But yes, there have been some very big demonstrations. Yes, there have been.
I want to add one thing. I don't know if you heard about it. The Zionist published an advertisement to all people and students and non-students in the United States that they're willing to pay $250 for each who would willing to participate in pro-Israel demonstration in Washington, D.C. on the 14th of this month.
Wow.
So this is how desperate they are. They're willing to pay anybody $200. It's a bribe. It's just basically a bribe. Anybody willing to join will give them $250 in order to join. They're pathetic. They're just pathetic.
Well, I found the public opinion of the Jewish community that were going into the Holocaust Museum open day, that I was demonstrating in front of last Sunday. About half was the reaction, some, like very extreme fanatic reactions, saying that I'm, supporting, the killing of 40 beheaded, burnt babies. But, that has been disproven on multiple, sources as being, propaganda. And the Israeli babies that were burned by tank fire or, Apache helicopter hellfire missiles. And now we have, a new report. Oh, yes. And, the other sort of, lie that came from the Zionist sources was that they hadn't bombed, the hospital that resulted in hundreds, of deaths. And, they just kept on doing, to other hospitals, so their credibility was shot there and then. Now we have a third expose here now. I have a screenshot, screen share to show you of it. And I have a conclusion to make to you as well about this. Here it is right here. Israeli Apache helicopters killed own soldiers and civilians on the 7th of October. This is a report, with video footage. Where does, Hamas have the firepower to do this? This is all the parked cars for all of the Nova Festival goers, who are all of the age, of soldiers. They're all soldiers, whether on duty or not, whether on reserve or not, But in any case, it becomes evident, that the strategy of Hamas was not to go in and kill as many, Jews as possible. No, it was to take as many Israeli military and settler hostages as possible.
The desperation we are seeing with the Zionist state is becoming more and more transparent. And the more, they clamp down on dissent and the more that they attempt to censor people, the stronger the opposition against the Zionists has become. That's why I think they agreed to the pause. It's not really that they care. They don't care about the Israeli hostages. This is an opportunity, as far as they could see, to genocide the people of Gaza. The state of Israel is over, and with it, the United States of America, although the state of Israel will clearly go first. Continuing now.
Hostages in order to exchange, for the release of the 5,000, Palestinian hostages that are called prisoners in the Israel prison system. And now an additional 1,000 from the West Bank as well. So, here it is, I'll stop this so, people can take a screenshot of this, from the video. This is documentary evidence here. And it shows that the new drone footage, and there's a link there as well, shows an aerial view of hundreds of burned and destroyed cars taken from the site of the festival. Claimed that they removed 260 bodies from the festival site. Israel claims that they were massacred by Hamas fighters and civilian Palestinian looters who fled across the open Gaza fence in the hours after the Hamas attack. However, the footage appears to confirm previous reports in Israeli media that Israeli pilots flying Apache helicopters responded to the attacks by opening fire on both Hamas fighters and Israelis. Yeah, this is called the Hannibal Directive, in which, in order to defeat the enemy, they will destroy, any hostages that they have.
Exactly.
In particular, if they're soldiers, because they don't want to be put into a position where they're forced by public opinion in Israel to exchange 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, like they did, in exchange for the one, Israeli soldier that was released, by Hamas previously.
Gilad Shalit.
Yeah. So here's all the information right here. Let me put here's a stop here, so this can be screen captured. And then the next section here, from here down.
Can you put a link?
This is doctor. This is like something that can disappear.
Can you put a link in the chat for our viewers?
Good idea.
Yeah.
It's a fact that the Zionists lie like they breathe. Actually, they lie more than they breathe.
Yeah.
Ever since the big lie, land without people for people without land, until now, we're not, quote unquote, we're not targeting hospitals or civilians. It's all house of lies. That's what they live on. That's what they disseminate to the world for, and this is who they are. Just a house of lies based on genocide and terrorism.
Yeah.
Again, looking at those homes in the Zionist colonies around Gaza, who were burned, being destroyed. I mean, you could tell this is a big shell that hit those homes. The Hamas fighters who entered the Gaza envelope area, as they call it, they were armed with light arms. They were not. They didn't come with tanks nor Apache helicopters to kill and murder hundreds of people at one point. So, I hope people understand and can see through the Zionist lies.
Right on, Ahmed. Like, wow. Okay, so that brings up some things here. So there is a connection between the Crusades, the Nazis, and the Zionists. This is very important to understand. The first settlements of Zionist settlers into Palestine were funded by Adolf Hitler. This has been repeatedly proven beyond a shadow of a doubt as a fact. And that's one thing we're getting at, is now facts are surfacing, and there's a crackdown on those who are presenting those facts to the public. So when you see Zionists operating the same way that Nazis are operating, you shouldn't be surprised. The Zionists are just doing what the Nazis are doing, creating modern warfare crusades. The Crusades have returned through a form of modern warfare against the peoples of the Orient. The whole thing of a land for a people without a land was originally said by a Christian Zionist who happened to be a British lord. And then it was said by a Jewish territorialist, and then it was said by a Zionist. Now, I can't remember the details of who's, and I'm sorry. Perhaps in the next Anti-Crusade video, Anti-Crusade Part 2 of 4, I will be able to pull up those sources, I hope. But it's just amazing. Like, Hotman's got a sharp memory of these things. I like that. I mean, we're in a really strange situation where decolonization is being accused of being genocidal when it's actually no colonization, which is genocidal. For instance, the genocide against the Native Americans and First Nations people is ongoing. Not only are the Native Mexicans, by the way, not only the Native Mexicans still having genocide occur upon them, but they have a double genocide which is ongoing against them because a cultural genocide occurs upon them. For instance, many of them are confused as Latino or Hispanic when they know they are indigenous. You know what a Latino is, and do you want to know what Hispanic is? If you are Sephardic Jewish, as I am, I would be considered Hispanic and Latino. French people are Latino, but they're not Hispanic. Same with Romanians, same with Italians. But if you are a Spaniard, from a Spanish, if your culture is Spanish, and you speak Spanish, and your background is very Spanish, and you have just a little like 2% of indigenous, DNA, that does not make you indigenous. So there are actual Latinos in Mexico that are referred to as Mexicans because of citizenship, but they are not. But this is a form of genocide. This is all part of cultural genocide. The native Mexicans and the mixed Mexicans are actually the Mexica, the actual indigenous. So mestizo and indigenous are the actual Mexica people, but the ongoing genocide against them is a cultural genocide as well as a physical one. And cultural genocide with physical genocide is much more effective. This is also what's done to the Palestinians. By the definition of their heritage, they are ancient Israelites. Another thing that should be understood is that Zionism, when people say Zionism is Jewish supremacy, that is anti-Semitism, because I'm going to go further right now while I can into what is Jewish supremacy. Jewish supremacy in modern terms would actually be Jewish territorialism. Now, I don't know if Dr. Weisfeld disagrees with me on that, and I'm willing to debate him on such, but I think he might concede to that, because territorialism just doesn't make sense for Jewish people. You could technically make the argument that Jewish Europeans have a right to a territory in Europe, but I would oppose that as well, because shtetl security, it would be a better idea than to having some piece of land for ourselves. Especially given Dr. Weisfeld's whole, suspicions about sovereignty and how he lumps it in together with the state. A thing I disagree with, but I'm making that disagreement known. I differentiate between state and sovereignty. He doesn't. I will, however, say you don't have a state without sovereignty, so sovereignty comes before state. But I'm kind of getting onto a little bit of a tangent here. And I'm probably going to have to get more into the difference between Jewish supremacy and Zionism in the next video, probably, because I don't want to derail this. But I'm like, Ahmed, when he speaks, he invokes like all this memory I have about all these things. I've spoken to him at least twice. I know that I've spoken to him once because I brought up Meir Shirim to him, and he instantly knew what I was talking about. Ahmed is very smart. He has like a sharp memory. And he's very well cultured. He's completely, fully Palestinian. And, to disagree with Atman about Palestinian history is to basically be a historical revisionist. And historical revisionists always carry out cultural genocide. So understand that, in the same way where Dr. Weisfeld is a national treasure to the Jewish diaspora nation, Atman is a national treasure to the indigenous Palestinian population, the indigenous Palestinian nation. And, Steve Struggle's quite the national treasure, too, because he is an actual Black Panther from the original Black Panther Party, but he doesn't say much this time around. Anyway, we're going to continue. Sorry for the rant, but, Atman, is, you got to give it to that guy. That guy's, he's always so spot on.
The towns that were captured, by the Hamas fighters, they were the towns from which the Palestinians were expelled in 1947, because that territory was initially allocated by the partition plan of the United Nations, Resolutions 181, giving that territory and recognizing that territory as being part of Gaza, part of Palestine.
Actually, let me just add one more fact that most people they don't know. In 1950s, at by 1955, the Gaza Strip was 750 square kilometers. When Israel invaded with the French and the British Egypt, okay, they took, of course, Gaza, the Zionists, they took over Gaza. And when they withdrew, they kept the 750 square kilometers minus the 365 square kilometers. So basically, these lands, okay, being occupied thereafter the proclamation of the state of Israel. So there were lots of villages, all the so-called Gaza envelope colonies lies in these areas.
Yeah. I mean, the Gaza fighters were probably the grandchildren of the very refugees that were made at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're just returning to their own hometowns, basically. Whereas being squatters from all over the world, okay, living on their land.
Yeah, squatters is the word for sure.
That's what they are. That's what they are. They're squatter colonists.
Yeah, and then they get the subsidies, up to 70,000 shekels a year, they get subsidies, a whole bunch of different subsidies as well. It's incredible. Yeah.
It is. It's bring us back to the subsidies that the Canadian and U.S. Governments furnished to the white colonists moving westward in the past 200 years.
Even the Zionist charities in Canada, collect money, without paying tax, so that like the Zionists, donate, to their own even military projects, and they get a tax deduction for it, 50% or something.
It's disgusting.
Yeah,
it's
our charity that was collecting, money for the peace movement in Israel, we got, deregistered, by the Federal Court of Appeal.
Absolutely, disgusting.
It is imperative that people share this video, because the facts just left and right, all, bam, 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 fact after fact after fact. These facts could be used, in a world court, hopefully, inshallah, because they're, the war crimes that the post-Nuremberg laws, put on the Nazis, this too must be put on the Zionists.
Yeah,
really disgusting.
There's two things that I have to bring up, that they're very distressing, that concern me a great deal, concerning Gaza. And that is that I think these are two reasons, these are politically economic reasons, that dictate that this, genocide is going to continue on for a long time, with the goal of seeking to expel the Palestinians there. And if they do not get expelled, then they are going to be, decimated, because this territory is of incredible strategic importance for two reasons. One, they intend to build a Ben Gurion Canal down to the Red Sea from Gaza, to connect the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, to India, and to the oil fields, of the Orient. Okay. And, they even theorize, making this canal using, nuclear bombs. So they could do, like a 2-in-1 stroke, like get rid of some Palestinians and, start to dig a trench, down to the Red Sea at the same time from Gaza. This is how crazy, their planning goes, to such extents. And, one Israeli spokesperson, was even talking about, the carpet bombing as being, a legitimate, measure, because that's what the Allies did to Germany in the Second World War. And then she makes reference, to the nuclear bombs as well, as if, that's included in permissible military tactics. Okay. That's one concern.
The Ben Gurion Canal, which runs from the port of Rashash, which they call it Eilat, alongside the Egyptian borders with Palestine, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, whereas Gaza Strip is lies. So basically, they want to ethnic cleanse the Gaza Strip, get rid of the Palestinians, create that canal. There's one more thing, which is very important. The offshore of Gaza, there's a huge, gas fields under the waters of the Mediterranean. That's so this like they're doing two birds in one stone.
Yeah.
The stone is the genocide or the Holocaust of the Palestinian people, ethnic cleansing them under the guise of defeating Hamas or defending itself, and create this canal and take over this wealth of gas underneath the Mediterranean, where you could see why the West, especially Europe, the major European states like Italy, Germany, France, and Britain are eager to get their hands on this gas fields.
This dialogue is very educational, and it will continue. This exact conversation will be continued in Anti-Crusade Part 2 of 4. Now, the final presentation for this video is a documentary from Al Jazeera, which came out on December 7th, 2016.
In the history of conflict between East and West, the mightiest battle between Christianity and Islam, a holy war in the name of religion. For the first time, the story of the Crusades from an Arab perspective. The Crusades are the epitome of holy war. Yet the roots of this 200-year conflict lay not in religion, but in the economic condition of medieval Europe.
وبين الحروب الصليبية شهدت أوروبا عدة مواسم من القحط. هذه المواسم من القحط جعلت الناس تكفر بكل شيء.
While the Pope was trying to hang on to his historic authority over the people of Europe.
هنا كان في صراع. من الذي يقود أوروبا؟ كلمة البابا ولا كلمة الحاكم؟
Meanwhile, in the East, internal divisions had weakened the previously all-powerful Islamic empire.
الصليبيين ليسوا أقوى وليسوا أكثر عدداً وليسوا أكثر تفوقاً في فنون القتال، ولكنهم انتصروا بفعل هذا التشرذم السياسي والسكاني.
In the first episode of this series, the story of the shock that engulfed the Muslim world with the arrival of the Crusades. The Mediterranean Basin, the 11th century of the Common Era, the peak of the Middle Ages. After centuries of European domination, largely through the armies of Imperial Rome, the region had fallen firmly under Muslim control.
المسلمين كانوا يحيطون بأوروبا من إسبانيا غرباً إلى شرق البحر المتوسط شرقاً. ابتدى الأوروبيين يقوموا برحلات إلى الشرق لأسباب كثيرة جدا، منها رحلات الحج إلى الأراضي المقدسة. وده أدى إلى وجود نوع من التعرف على الآخر. الآخر في هذه الظروف هم البيزنطيين اللي هم المسيحيين الشرقيين الأرثوذكس والمسلمين.
بالنسبة للأوروبيين الشرق هو ألف ليلة وليلة، يعني هو شرق الغنى، شرق الملابس الجميلة، شرق الجواري، شرق الحياة العامة المزدهرة، الغناء، الثقافة.
As the Muslim East lived in prosperity, the West, Europe, had declined into poverty and conflict.
أوروبا قبيل الحروب الصليبية، يعني في القرن ال11، عبارة عن تعبير جغرافي، يعني هذه المنطقة من العالم اسمها أوروبا. وجود دول في أوروبا لم يكن موجوداً، يعني حتى لا تختلط علينا الأمور، يعني لا نتصور أن أوروبا اليوم هي أوروبا في القرن ال11.
The medieval Western society was a feudal society, which meant that you had a military aristocracy in charge of a large amount of people that had no land possessions.
1% من السكان النبلاء وألقابهم كونت أو دوق أو بارون يملكون جميع الأراضي الزراعية، و99% من سكان أوروبا يلقبون أقنان، ومفردها قن، يعني عبد الأرض. لا يمكن لهذا القن أن يترك الأرض، حتى لو بيعت هذه الأرض من إنسان لآخر يظل هو مرتبط بالأرض.
Ces hommes ne pensent qu'au salut. Leur vie est courte, leur vie est souvent très dure, prise par des maladies, par des conditions d'existence pénibles.
ولهذا عثرت في أدبيات العصر على امرأة قنة، ومن البرد القارس كان ابنها ورضيعها يبكي ليل نهار. الولد اسمه بودو، تقول باللغة الإفرنجية: بودو my baby do not cry، بودو my baby hush and die. تتمنى لابنها الموت بدلاً من هذه الحياة التعيسة.
Despite the poverty and suffering of the common people, feudal lords were living a very different life.
كان الملك يمنح بعض الطبقة الأرستقراطية من الفرسان قسم أو أقسام من أراضيه. هؤلاء الفرسان الذين ينحدرون من هذا السيد أو من هذا الفصل الإقطاعي، فكان الابن البكر يتولى الإقطاع، بينما الإخوة الآخرين هم يصبحون عاطلين عن العمل. ماذا يفعلون؟ هم فرسان، فبطبيعة الحال كانوا يسعون للتفتيش عن مصادر لرزق عن طريق أعمال اللصوصية وأعمال القرصنة.
هذه الكيانات الصغيرة الإقطاعية كانت في حرب دائمة ضد بعضها البعض، وده أدى إلى نوع من مجتمع الحرب حقيقة يومية فيه.
وحاولت البابوية أن تجد حلاً من خلال باكس ديدي أو سلام الرب، إلا أنها فشلت، فرأت ضرورة أن الطاقة الحربية لدى المقاتلين والفرسان تصدرها خارج أوروبا في مشروع هي تقوده.
هذا يشير إلى أن قوة الكنيسة أخذت تشتد، بل أن أرضها التي تملكها الكنيسة كانت تفوق أراضي ملوك أوروبا مجتمعة، وخزائنها المالية وما فيها من نفائس كانت تفوق خزائن ملوك أوروبا مجتمعة.
On the other side of the Mediterranean lay the prosperity and cultural riches of the Muslim world. But this glittering facade hid deep political and religious discord.
العالم الإسلامي في تلك المرحلة في قمة التشرذم، فلما أجد أنا عندي الدولة العباسية في بغداد يعاندها ويعاصيها الدولة الفاطمية في مصر، لأن هؤلاء شيعة وهؤلاء سنة.
From the mid-9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate had gradually fallen under the control of different dynasties. The caliphs, meant to be the universal leaders of Islam, were no more than puppets in the hands of ministers, army commanders, and even servants.
لدرجة أنه حصل انقلاب قام به الفاطميون في بغداد عاصمة الخلافة العباسية، وأنقذوا الأتراك السلاجقة، إنما على طريقة أن جيش الإنقاذ يتحول دائما إلى جيش احتلال.
السلاجقة دول الأتراك من أواسط آسيا اعتنقوا الإسلام، ثم سيطروا على الخلافة العباسية في عهد طغرل بيه.
The Seljuks began expanding their empire in all directions. The most significant and serious expansion was in Asia Minor, against the Christian Byzantine Empire. And after the victory of the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuks moved closer to Constantinople, the great capital of the Byzantine Empire.
نجح الأتراك السلاجقة في أسر رومانوس ديجونيس الرابع. خليفته طلب مساعدة من الغرب الأوروبي وبعت وفد يطلب ده. جريجور السابع الذي سماه زملاؤه الشيطان المقدس لقى فيها فرصة لتحقيق حلمه بالسيطرة على كنيسة القيامة وتجميع القوى المسلحة كلها تحت قيادة البابوية في حملة سماها مشروع الرب.
البابا جريجوري كان عنده فكرة الحرب المقدسة، فهو فكر وهو اللي كان في ذهنه أن تذهب حملة إلى الشرق لاسترداد قبر السيد المسيح كما بيعتقد من إيد المسلمين اللي اعتبرهم أنهم اغتصبوه.
ابتدت تتكون نوع من الدعاية النازقة في تصوير المسلمين في صورة بشعة تبرر العدوان عليهم.
Western Christians at the time didn't see Islam as a separate religion. They tended to see Islam as a Christian heresy. They saw it as a diversion from Christianity. Now, they're, of course, completely wrong about that.
وكان العصور الوسطى معروف عنها أن كل الشعب الأوروبي في مختلف البلدان لا يقرأ ولا يكتب.
في وسط هذا المجتمع الجاهل اللي ما بيجيلوش قسيس غير مرة كل سنة في أعياد الميلاد، والقسيس نفسه أمي لا يقرأ ولا يكتب، تخيل أنت في وسط المجتمع الجاهل ده مدى التعصب اللي ممكن يتولد. إنما لم تأتي الرياح بما تشتهي سفن البابوي.
Pope Gregory died in 1085. before turning his project into reality. However, 3 years later, an even more ambitious pope took the post, Urban II.
وواحد من أخطر بابوات العصور الوسطى، رجل متعصب للغاية، يؤمن بتصدير المسيحية الكاثوليكية ويرى تحريب المسيحية.
Urbain II est sensible aux souffrances des chrétiens d'Orient et elles ont été exagérées par la propagande de l'empereur de Byzance, et il se considère aussi maître de toute la chrétienté. Il considère que c'est un espace sur lequel il a des droits.
In November 1095, in Clermont, France, Pope Urban held a Catholic Church council. But what started as a religious gathering took a dramatic turn on its 10th day. On that day, the Pope would make a speech that would be the starting point of 2 centuries of bloodshed. The Crusades.
Cher peuple, Dieu nous a aimés. Il nous demande de chasser ces mécréants de la Terre Sainte, cette terre où Jésus-Christ fut crucifié. C'est pas moi qui vous le demande.
في مجمل الخطاب يقول: يا جنس الفرنجة، لقد وصلت إلينا أخبار سيئة من الشرق عن جنس ملعون حول كنائس الشرقيين إلى اسطبلات لخيولهم وذبحهم، وإن الدماء المراقة في الشرق تناديكم.
وكيف أن قبر السيد المسيح وقع في يد الكفرة والوثنيين، وقال أن عليهم المشاركة في حملة لاسترداد القبر المقدس.
وهو ما كانش حتى يقول مسلم، كان دايما يقول ساراسنز، وحاليا يقول انفيديلز الكفرة، وحاليا يقول ذا باجنز يعني الوثنيين. ما جابش كلمة مسلم فيها ولا جاب كلمة كروسيد فيها، هو جاب يتكلم على هولي وور، حرب مقدسة.
Nous devons combattre ces mécréants. Il faut reprendre notre terre sainte. C'est Dieu qui vous le demande.
What Urban does is that he addresses directly the spiritual anxieties. So if you go on a crusade, your sins, the penalties that otherwise you would have to perform for your sins are remitted.
هذا العامل الديني هو عامل أساسي عادة في الشعوب، خاصة الشعوب عند الفقراء، له كلمة سحر عند الفقراء، ولكن عند البرجوازيين والنبلاء والأعيان لا أعتقد أن عادة العوامل الدينية هي المحركة.
إربان قدم نوع من المكافأة، ما هو مش معقول الناس تروح كل ده وما يبقاش فيه جايزة، فقدم جايزة متمثلة في أراضي الشرق، فلسطين التي تفيض باللبن والعسل كما يقول الكتاب المقدس.
Il faut se battre. Continuez à vous battre. Toujours se battre pour défendre nos biens, nos terres et nos biens qui sont à vous.
بمجرد ما البابا أنهى يعني خطبته، قام بعض الناس وقالوا الرب يريدها، وراحوا مقطعين شرايط حمراء ولزقوها على صدر التونيك وبقوا موسومين بالصليب، وبدأ الاستعداد لخروج الحملة.
Pope Urban drew up a schedule for the first campaign. With winter approaching, he declared that the campaign should set out the following summer of 1096. But there were many who would ignore this holy command. They found a leader prepared to guide them immediately to the east. An old monk called Peter the Hermit.
الناس اللي شافوه وعصروه من المؤرخين اللاتين قالوا ان هو رجل ذري الهيئة نحيف الجسد، أوتي فصاحة في اللسان وقدرة على مخاطبة الجماهير، وبينه وبين حماره شبه عجيب. ولأنه كان يعني بيلبس ملابس خشنة من الصوف وحافي القدمين، فالناس تصوروا انه هذا هو الفقر الرسولي اللي يلهم. بدأ بطرس الناسك يجمع بقى شذاذ الآفاق والنسوة الخاطئات واللي هربانين من الديون، وانضم إليه بعض المتسرعين من الفرسان.
القوة اللي عند بطرس الناسك هي البلاغة، فطاف في كل ما يمكن أن يطوف في أنحاء أوروبا وأبلغ بالدعوة للحملة الشعبية. الحملة الشعبية دي حسالة الأوروبيين كلهم، كل واحد خرج من غيطه شايل فاس على كتفه وصردة حاطط فيها شوية خلجات زي ما بنقول، فتجمعت أخلاط الناس.
مشهد غريب يبين من الأول مدى الإفلاس الإيديولوجي لهذه الحملة التي خرجت تحت راية الصليب. لا هم عارفين الطريق ولا عارفين المسافة وانطلقوا، لكنهم كانوا شيئا آخر غير جيش الرب.
This is a very indisciplined group. Not many nobles taking part in it. Poor leadership. They're desperate for money. They're poorly funded. They are out to kill and get money wherever they can.
One of the criticisms of Peter the Hermit's armies and indeed other Crusader armies is that they attack fellow Christians, co-religionists. They often did this for practical reasons.
En route, they are out to seize whatever they can get to survive. So they will take property, crops, prisoners if they can, anything to keep themselves going. And if that happens to be Christians or it happens to be Jews, then that is, as far as they're concerned, the way it is. They are simply trying to keep themselves going.
كانت البيوت المحترقة والكنائس المهدمة دليلاً على أن جيش الرب قد مر من هنا.
After over 4 months of exhausting marching across Europe, the People's Crusade reached the Byzantine capital, Constantinople, the crossing point to Asia and the Holy Land.
الامبراطور اللي موجود أليكسيس كومنن هو كان طلب من أوروبا نجدة، ولكن هذه ليست نجدة، هذه كارثة، لأنه عبء على المدينة.
الناس اللي جاية مع بطرس الناسك لقوا كنائس متلألئة جميلة مكسوة بالفضة، وشافوا الجيش البيزنطي لابس لبس حلو بيبرق. حصل نوع من الصدمة الحضارية، فبدأوا يهاجموا الكنائس والمباني العامة، فأمر الجيش بنقلهم مباشرة إلى آسيا الصغرى.
The Crusaders who crossed the Bosporus now found themselves marching in territory controlled by hostile forces, principally the Muslim Seljuks. A few weeks after they landed in Asia Minor, they fell into a well-set Seljuk ambush. In a short battle, the vast majority of the 20,000 Crusaders were slaughtered.
ما كان لهؤلاء دور، صدقوا أنهم سيحظون بنعيم الجنة في حال ما وصلوا إلى بيت المقدس وحرروها من أيدي المسلمين.
But while the undisciplined rabble of the People's Crusade were meeting a tragic end in Asia Minor, Another wave of the Holy War was forming. The nobility of Europe was gathering stronger, larger, and more organized armies. Armies that would go down in history as the First Crusade. Europe, the autumn of 1096.
Nous devons combattre ces mécréants.
A year earlier,
Reprendre notre terre sainte.
Pope Urban II had declared a war to reconquer the Holy Land from the Muslims. The Crusades. The first Christians to head towards Jerusalem, enthusiastic but undisciplined, had been crushed by the Muslim Seljuks in Asia Minor. But now, much stronger, larger, and more organized forces were gathering and advancing eastwards. These armies, forming the First Crusade, were commanded by figures of European nobility. Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, and his brother Baldwin of Boulogne, Hugh I, Count of Vermandois, and brother of King Philip I of France, Robert, Duke of Normandy, brother of King William II of England, and Bohemond the Norman, Prince of Taranto.
A lot of male nobility that had a function as warmen, as warlords, and they would see the crusade as a way to carve out a little kingdom in the east, perhaps, of their own, or also to find glory in warfare.
بدأت الجيوش تخرج من غرب أوروبا متوجهة إلى الأرض المقدسة. بعضهم كان خرج للدفاع عن سمعته، وبعضهم خرج لكي يكتسب أرض جديدة ويبني إمبراطورية.
By the end of 1096, the European armies started arriving at the Byzantine capital, Constantinople. But the Byzantine emperor, Alexios Komnenos, wouldn't allow them to cross into Asia Minor before spring the following year.
هم ما قدروش يمشوا الا باستعانة ببيزنطة لسبب. هيمشوا في اسيا الصغرى، دي منطقة لا يعلم طبيعتها الا البيزنطيين والادلاء بتاعتهم، محتاجين لمؤن طول السكة، اللي يقدر يمدهم بالمؤن البيزنطيين.
كل اللي طلبوا من البيزنطي جملتين: انهم يأدوا له يمين الولاء والطاعة. نمرة 2، ان يعيدوا الاراضي التي سيفتحونها وكانت بيزنطية تعود الى بيزنطة.
فبعد تقديم اليمين الولاء والطاعة والتعهد بإعادة المناطق التي استولى عليها الأتراك السلاجقة، سمح لهم بدخول أراضيه إلى آسيا الصغرى.
After crossing the Bosphorus, the Crusaders marched towards the Seljuks' capital in Asia Minor, the city of Nicaea.
جابوا ناس ولبسوهم عساكر سلجوقية وجم من خلف مدينة نقية في بحيرة وراحوا راكبين سفن وعدوا وليسوا كصليبيين. ما كانش سلطان السلجوق موجود. هنا أصيبت القيادة السلجوقية بصدمة عسكرية فنجحوا في السير على العاصمة. هذه أول خطوة.
True to the oath they had sworn to the emperor, the city of Nicaea was returned to the Byzantines. And as the Crusaders continued their successful march in Asia Minor, their holy task of taking Jerusalem was set aside. Baldwin of Boulogne decided to abandon the armies heading southwards, and at the invitation of its Armenian Christian ruler, marched east to Edessa.
Baldwin I is one of the leaders of the First Crusade, and amongst the many contingents, he decides to move towards Edessa. This is a strategically important place. He's also one of the few Crusade leaders who wants to set up his own land there. So he's looking to establish a territory that he can govern for himself.
حاكم المدينة قال للبلدوين إن هو هيتبناه وإن بعد وفاته من حقه إن هو يرث إمارة الرها. بولدوين كان مستعجل مش مستني إن الراجل يموت وبقى ويستنى وبتاع. قامت ثورة في المدينة ضد الحاكم إمارة الرها، هو راح مشارك فيها واتقتل الراجل وتولى هو إمارة الرها.
ودي كانت أول إمارة صليبية يتم تأسيسها في الشرق.
الرها السيطرة عليها دلالة على أن الروح الدينية مفقودة عند الصليبيين وعند القادة الصليبيين الذين جاءوا بحجة تحرير القبر المقدس من الكفار. والرها ليست على طريق القدس، والرها ليس فيها أي حواري من حواري السيد المسيح، وليست محجة.
Il y a donc cette volonté de fonder une famille sur une terre, d'obtenir du pouvoir. Il y a aussi un autre argument qui a été utilisé, qui est celui de créer une sorte de glacis protecteur face aux Turcs, d'organiser la société d'après des principautés territoriales, d'après des lignes de châteaux, des seigneuries, le système qu'ils connaissaient en Occident, une société prête à la guerre contre l'islam. Et pour cela, donc, il fallait créer des territoires occupés par des chrétiens latins.
While Baldwin was heading towards Edessa, the main army marched on, reaching the walls of Antioch, a city nicknamed the Cradle of Christianity, as the term Christian first originated. But taking Antioch would prove a hard task for the Christians now laying siege to the city.
مدينة أنطاكيا موقعها محصن جدا ولم يكن من السهل الاستيلاء عليها بمعركة عسكرية مفتوحة.
عندما وصلت أخبار تقدم حملة الأمراء إلى الأمير السلجوقي ياغسيان، بدأ بالاستعداد لحصار طويل الأمد.
وحوصرت أنطاكيا عاما عانى فيه الصليبيون معاناة كبيرة، وأكلوا أوراق الأشجار. المصادر الصليبية تذكر هذا الأمر بالتفصيل لكي يبينوا أن أنطاكيا يعني كان هناك بطولة صليبية كبيرة.
ظلت المدينة صامدة إلى درجة كبيرة جدا، إلى أن بقى بدأت الخيانة.
Nairuz, a Christian who had previously converted to Islam, and the commander of one of the city's guard towers, was bribed to help the Crusaders.
في الليل اتفق بوهيموند النورماني مع واحد اسمه نيروز انه يفتح لهم احد ابواب الحصن. بوهيموند تسلق على سلم من الحبال نزله لهم نيروز من البرج اللي هو بيتولى حراسته في الحصن. ونزلوا من الحصن هذه المجموعة لتفتح أبواب المدينة، لكنهم لم يستطيعوا الاستيلاء على الحصن نفسه.
كل مدينة في العصور الوسطى كان في برج في وسط المدينة، هو ده الرمز بتاعها اللي فيه الحاكم. لا تسقط المدينة إلا إذا سقط هذا البرج. فظل أهل البرج متمسكين بموقفهم، وهو كان متمسك ليه؟ هو في مكان عالي والمكان اللي تحت مخنوق، وأنا معايا السلاح بتاعي وأقدر أدافع عن نفسي أطول فترة ممكنة، لحد ما تجي أمل بإيه؟ بالحمام الزاكي اللي بعتوا لي نجدة.
Governor Yerisian's calls for assistance were soon answered. Karbogha, the ruler of Mosul in Iraq, moved his army westwards and laid siege to now Christian-occupied Antioch.
حصار شديد جدا لدرجة أن المجاعة دبت في الصليبيين في أنطاكيا.
And it appears as if the Crusaders were almost defeated. They spent a couple of years getting to this place, all their effort, all their loss of life. And really, they're so close to defeat, it pretty well needs a miracle for them to survive. And that's pretty well what they got.
جاء أحد رجال الدين وادعى أن السيد المسيح ظهر له في منام ودله على أن الحرب المقدسة اللي هو طعن بيها في جنبه موجودة في المكان الفلاني.
They dig, and in the end they find this lance. And this is something that inspires the troops. God has given them a sign that if they persevere, they will succeed.
The fact they'd actually seen another one in Constantinople as they went through seems to be conveniently forgotten. It was a morale booster.
Meanwhile, outside the walls of Antioch, the surrounding Muslim army was disintegrating. Some of the commanders fell out with the arrogant Karbogha and decided to withdraw their troops. An opportunity seized on by the Crusaders.
وخرج الصليبيون وهم في وضع منهك وانتصروا على كربوغة لأنه كان بوضع يعني لا يحسد عليه، وهم بين أمرين باقيين ميتين وإذا خرجوا أيضا يمكن أن ينتصروا، وهكذا تم الانتصار.
وتسقط أنطاكيا بشكل نهائي في إيديهم. لما كان في مشكلة الصليبيين لما جم في الأول، لو احنا فاكرين، أقسموا يمين الولاء للإمبراطور البيزنطي، إنما لما استولوا على أنطاكيا لم يعيدوها إلى الإمبراطور البيزنطي، وإنما احتفظوا بها لأنفسهم.
The Crusaders spent the rest of 1098 in the captured city, arguing over who should be the ruler of the second Crusader settlement in the east, the Principality of Antioch. The dispute was finally settled in favor of Bohemond of Taranto. The rest of the armies set off south towards their main goal, Jerusalem. But this time, their march along the Levantine coast met no resistance.
الصليبيون يطرحون على كل من يمر بهم أي منطقة تساعدنا نبقيت دون ذبح. فالبعض كنوع من مواجهة هذا الطوفان وافق على أن يساعد الصليبيين إبقاء على حياته.
تمت في نوع من الموادعة، حتى الإنجليز يكتبوا لك إيه؟ باي اميونيتي، يعني اشتري سلامته.
كل مدينة كبيرة في بلاد الشام كانت إمارة أو مملكة. لما جه الصليبيين ليسوا أقوى، وليسوا أكثر عدداً، وليسوا أكثر تفوقاً في فنون القتال، وليسوا أكثر شجاعة، وليسوا أكثر تحضراً، ولكنهم انتصروا بفعل هذا التشرذم السياسي والسكاني.
In June 1099, and after 3 years of a long march, bloody battles, plagues and famines, the Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem.
حصروا المدينة عدة أيام، وعملوا حواليها نوع من الطواف الطقوسي ونوع من الطقوس الدينية، وتشبهوا فيها بما جرى في العهد القديم.
كانوا متأثرين بأخبار التوراة، ومتأثرين بأخبار سقوط أريحة على يد يشوع بن نون، عندما بدأ اليهود يدورون حول أسوار أريحة ويعزفون بالأبواق ويتلون الصلوات، واعتقدوا أن إرادة إلهية أسقطت الأسوار ودخلوا إلى المدينة. كانوا يعتقدون أن هذه الحالة يمكن أن تتكرر أيضاً في سقوط أسوار القدس.
But marching in the name of religion failed to bring down the walls. So the Crusaders fell back on the usual method: war. For 5 weeks, they laid siege to the holy city.
المدينة كانت سيئة التحصين، لأن الفاطميين كانوا قد استولوا عليها قبل فترة قصيرة من الأتراك السلاجقة وهدوا تحصيناتها.
هنا بنجد أن حصار اشتد والمقاومة الفاطمية فترة أهل المدينة لم يتمكنوا من الصمود، وفي نهاية الأمر دخل الصليبيون مدينة بيت المقدس.
كان دخولا مرعبا، يعني بدأوا بمجزرة يندى لها الجبين، قتلوا الناس في الشوارع، في المنازل، في الأزقة.
it was very difficult for crusaders to distinguish between local Muslim population, local Jewish population, and local Christian population, because they all looked the same. They all looked like Arabs.
تذكر المصادر العربية أن نحو 100,000 شخص ذبحوا، بدليل أن المذبحة استمرت 10 أيام، ووجد نوع من السادية المريضة الجماعية بشكل غير مسبوق.
الذي سجل بشاعة الصليبيين لم تكن أقلام عربية بل أقلام غربية.
جماجم القتلى، السكالز، الجماجم لو جمعت لأقامت أسوارا تعلو عن أسوار بيت المقدس، وأن الخيول كانت تخوض في برك من الدماء.
وكما قال مؤرخيهم من مؤرخي الحملة وكانوا من رجال الدين، إننا وفينا بالنذر الصليبي حينما وصلت دماء المسلمين إلى ركبنا.
When the armies of the First Crusade finally break into Jerusalem in July 1099, they release the pent-up tensions of 3 years on the march and having finally achieved their spiritual goal. So really, it's a situation where the Crusaders wish to purify the city and take it back for themselves. And those defenders that survive are then driven out of the city.
الأماكن الإسلامية دنست، قبة الصخرة والمسجد الأقصى كله تعرض للتدنيس وللتدمير.
المسجد الأقصى جعلوه اسطبلا لخيولهم. كنيسة القيامة حولت المراسم فيها إلى طقوس كاثوليكية وليست طقوس شرقية.
بعد ما تأكدوا إن هم قتلوا كل اللي عايزين يقتلوه، وهم تقريبا جميع سكان المدينة من المدنيين، دخلوا وأيديهم تقطر دماء وجباههم تتفصد عرقا، وعلى مذبح كنيسة القيامة قالوا نشكرك يا رب. كان نجاح الحملة الصليبية الأولى في اقتحام مدينة بيت المقدس والاستيلاء عليها أمرا يفوق الحلم الذي حركهم من الغرب الأوروبي، ولكنه كان عقابا للمسلمين والعرب على فرقتهم وتقاتلهم فيما بينهم.
With the capture of Jerusalem, the First Crusade had achieved its greatest victory. But this initial success would not last. It was to be merely a dramatic opening scene in a far longer struggle. And as the Muslim revival began, so the ground was laid for another 2 centuries of the Crusades.